on Thursday, June 4th, 2020, at 5:35 or so p.m. If you would, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, cue cards next time. All righty. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Well, moving forward, Mr. Shane Fox, 2020-21 budget presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify for anyone that may be listening or watching, I guess, so to speak, we have set up a little bit of a hybrid this week. So we have just the council, the mayor, and myself here at Town Hall, a total of 7 of us. Department heads and our press folks are listening and watching through WebEx, and they will be participating later and during the presentation and later during the workshop. And then we have the live feed set up as we've done the last several meetings, YouTube Live for anyone that is obviously interested in watching. So I just want to clarify that we are here present in Town Hall, but only 7 of us here. So hopefully the technology works. So we do have a PowerPoint that is being shared through WebEx and YouTube Live right now that you see on the screen. So I'll start with the presentation. Please stop me, as always, with any questions you may have, and then if okay with you, then we'll start the workshop portion thereafter. So I wanted to do a summary presentation to begin with of some of the highlights of this year. It's a short, I would say short, 20-slide presentation, so it won't be as long as maybe others as we get into it. But that being said, I'll be glad to start if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, purpose tonight is for the budget presentation and budget workshop. No decisions on adoption tonight can be made. The budget was delivered to you last Saturday, May the 30th. General statutes allow 10 days before the budget for the public to review and make comments on the budget prior to adoption. So the earliest the adoption could be would be next Tuesday night. That is when our public hearing is scheduled, June the 9th. And potential adoption that night. If we were not to adopt that night, then obviously we would need to schedule a special meeting thereafter prior to July 1st to adopt the budget. Could not say more of a thank you this year more than ever with COVID-19 and the craziness that has been with us the last few months with working through the budget process. I think you'll see as we get into the budget, you'll see very hard work by all the department heads to really cut as much as they can out of their budgets to keep the essential services and the town operating as normal. It was a team effort. Most notably Nicole Norman, again, through this process, we're all working, some of us working remotely, some of us are working in the office in a hybrid approach. This is a difficult thing to do when it's good times and normal circumstances. It's an extremely difficult thing to do when you're having to work at all hours of the day and teach children and do things of that nature in the midst of it. So it was a full team effort, but most notably, thank you to Nicole, Ms. Norman, for all the work that she's put into this. Outline of what we'll talk about during the presentation. I'll start with the budget timeline. I think that's important this year more than ever, just to give everyone a feel for the time that's been put into this budget. We'll go through the general fund, highlights and summary, revenues, expenditure. Then we'll go into the water and sewer fund. Talk a little bit about debt service, briefly touch on the TDA's budget, and then thought we would stop or end the presentation portion at least with just reviewing our retreat topics. It's been a while since we've done that. So, a lot of dates up here, but I wanted to just make sure that everyone had a chance to see. You know, normally the budget starts in late January. Our budget workbooks, Excel workbooks are rolled, and we did that this year as normal. February the 13th, they were sent out to departments, and we gave everyone approximately 3 weeks to return those. The week of March the 9th, that Monday, we began meeting with all the department heads, and we were completed with those on Friday. Of course, on Saturday the 15th is when we issued our state of emergency. So we had just finished the budget meetings working through some of the requests, a lot of the capital improvement planning, et cetera, when obviously state of emergency was issued. For several weeks, not a lot of budget work was done, and that was obviously more of a survival time for all of us to figure out how we were going to proceed forward and how long the state of emergency was going to last. Of course, now we're sitting here on June the 4th, and we're still under it. So, starting in mid-May, or mid-April, I should say, revised workbooks were sent back out, and we were asking department heads, first and foremost, to cut as much as they could out of their budgets, most notably capital needs that may be able to wait another year, and then from there, operating needs. If there were things that potentially could wait, let's wait. A lot of uncertainty at that time, still uncertainty now. I think we're starting to get a little better picture of maybe how things are potentially going to play out. Still a lot of uncertainty, of course, but that was done in the middle of April. And so then, the beginning of May, those meetings that did take place in March took place virtual phone and Zoom and et cetera meetings as we went back through those workbooks. Again, this is probably several weeks later than normal, but that was indeed the timeline that we were given. And then where we are today was the budget books, workbooks and proposed budgets were delivered to the council on May the 30th. And then, of course, tonight we're here doing the presentation and workshop, and then the public hearing will be next Tuesday. But I thought it was important just to lay out the timeline. We were very, very close after the meetings to having a budget ready, and obviously I know we're not alone in that situation. And then COVID-19 began, and we had to make some pretty tough decisions there. Highlights. We'll start with an increase in revenue. This will be the only one that you'll see, I think, within the budget itself. But an increase in property tax revenue, approximately up 2.7%, or roughly that equates to $130,000 in actual dollars. We're not proposing a tax increase. Our current rate is 0.39 or 39 cents per $100 of valuation. The reason for the increase was our tax base increased approximately $34 million. Questions are always asked about when does something go on the tax scrolls. Of course, Watauga County is our local county that keeps the tax scrolls for us. If the property is not issued a CO, it is, by January the 1st, it is not listed on the tax scrolls. So anything after January the 1st, essentially, of this year that was completed or COs issued, it will not show and is not showing within the tax scroll that you have in front of you.
Would that be the Liberty? Would Liberty fall into that category now, the old Foley Center?
Correct. And the majority of what you see here is I'm assuming Liberty. I know Village of the Chestnut, the condos, is a portion of those, but a lot of the work that's been going on in the last, 6, 7, 8 months that you've seen, 1150 Main, the Cornish, those are not included here. Those will be included next year. Right. So we start with a positive, with an increase of approximately $130,000 in our tax revenue. Again, that's due to the tax base increase. When talking across the state, and I know we've all been a part of different emails and Zoom meetings, et cetera, about how to project sales tax revenue. And us, probably more importantly than a lot of places, being essentially a second home tourist type area. So sales tax to us, along with our hotel, motel, or occupancy tax, are both extremely important numbers. Everywhere from 10% to 50% were discussed across the state. We landed at 30. We thought 30% was a good, safe number. That's after conversations with other local counties and municipalities. Boone, I believe, is doing 30%. I think the county did 25%. So again, this is a difficult number, more so than ever before. We don't know where we're going to end up. We don't know how the impacts of COVID-19 are truly going to impact us. Sales tax is received several months in arrears. So right now we just received the March numbers. So we're still obviously waiting on April and May, even though we're in the 1st of June. So this number is a complicated number to begin with, but it's much more complicated this year given the fact that we don't know how folks are going to return to buying things within Watauga County and Bull and Rock. So we've used a 30% number, a decrease of 30%, which equates to $275,000 in revenue, decrease in revenue. On the TDA side, after conversations with Director Brown, he felt 40% was a good number, and that's what the TDA board passed just 2 nights ago. So the 40% for us equates to $134,000 on the town side. And then Park and Recreation, we obviously met here just a couple weeks ago now, and discussed our park and rec programs. We know summer camps are not going to happen. The pool is ongoing. We are having good strides there. I'll have some information to you soon on potential of the pool. But we ended up cutting our park and rec revenues by 50% as a good, safe number. That is our rentals, that's our summer camps, and our pool. So there's, 50% is what we went with, was $67,000 decrease in revenue. This budget doesn't include, like I said, no property tax, proposed property tax increases. It does not propose any increases with any of the rates or fees at this point either. Next, we'll move over to the expenditure side for the general fund. No COLA or merit is proposed at this point. Personnel, we did include, again, the funding of the SRO position. And we do have one new FTE, which is our dispatch position that is funded via the dispatch change that we'll talk about in a little bit later as we made the change with Watauga County to the town of Boone potentially. Capital outlay, we only have really one area in capital outlay, and that's within our police department. We have included one hybrid police cruiser. Those cars are bought, and it is a pretty lengthy delivery time. I think usually 6 or 7 or 8 months on those, so we wanted to keep one in the pipeline. We've normally bought 2, is my understanding, and that's what the history shows. We've tried to buy 2 each year, so we've cut that in half. And then there's a little bit of capital that you'll see in a few minutes that is related to getting our dispatch services up and running with some of our consoles and things of that nature. But overall, our capital outlay has a decrease of $326,000 from last year to this year. Operating expenditures decreased approximately 10% across the board. That equates to about $200,000. And again, as we go through the workshop, we can walk through where those decreases happen. And then a increase in expenses is with our phase 3 of the bond that was issued in January. So when we obviously went through the repayment of Sunset and our paving plan that's underway right now, the plan obviously, and we were all aware of the fact that our debt service would be due this year, in the 2021 year. That's about $315,000 just for the general fund. What I've shown so far, I'll summarize on the next slide, is obviously the hits, the increase to the property tax revenue because of the base, the decrease with the other revenues that we talked about, and then obviously some of the cuts within the expenditure side, and then some of the cuts within the operating side and capital side. So this was a summary slide that I wanted to include that somewhat wraps up the first 2 or the last 2 slides that we had. Let me just pause. Mute Mr. Rogers there. Overall revenues decreased approximately $365,000. That does include the increase in the property tax revenue. So if you take the property tax revenue increase along with the other decreases, we're starting out about $365,000. These are approximate numbers, of course. $365,000 below where we were last year. Our expenditures decreased approximately $500,000. Most of that's within, obviously, our capital and operating. We had an increase in debt service, though, of $315,000. So that's a negative number here because that's going the wrong direction from a cash flow perspective. We did have one change that is not noted in your book, and that change came today in a positive manner. More than a year ago, I think going into 2 years ago, the conversation was had about reserving monies for phase 3 debt service. $120,000 in the general fund and $60,000 in the enterprise fund, or the water and sewer fund, was set aside. That money has not been utilized, and so one proposed change to the books you have in front of you is that we utilize that reserve now. Ms. Norman and I talked today and feel like that this is probably an appropriate time to utilize that reserve. So that $120,000 is included here as a positive number. If you look at last year, the way that we balanced our budget, we ended up using $120,000 in fund balance. So that number comes back out. All that being said, we're proposing the general fund budget this year to be balanced by utilizing $180,000 in reserves currently, as it is proposed in front of you. Obviously, a lot of work left to be done through the workshop, suggestions, etc., but this is just for presentation purposes. I know the $300,000 number was what was included in earlier emails. The 120 was discovered today as we were digging back through some historical records and things of that nature. So. A pie chart, we won't spend a lot of time here on this. The next couple slides are pie charts, just wanting to emphasize, where our revenues are derived from. 53% of our property taxes, 53% of our general fund revenues are property taxes, 15% is local sales tax, 11% is our hotel motel occupancy tax. We'll talk in just a few moments. It is important to note that our local sales tax number and our occupancy tax number are gross numbers. Those aren't net numbers, and we'll talk about why that is in a few moments. It's in accounting purposes. But the 1.287 in sales tax is the gross number, and the 917,000 in occupancy tax is the gross number. But this is just a breakdown. The 300,000 is still showing here on the fund balance appropriated. That number right now, like I said, as of right now, is at 180, not 300. Whoops, let me go back. Yep, okay. So we go into just a few slides here. You've seen these for a number of years. I think it's important just to note, we don't have to emphasize necessarily, but if you look at Watauga County, which is not shown there at 40 and a half cent, I think, or 40353, I think is their actual tax rate. Yeah, they're not shown here, but what we are showing here is obviously Blowing Rock, Boone, Seven Devils, and Beach Mountain, and the comparative tax rates that are being shown there. And then I think it's always important to know when you're discussing the budget and you're making decisions, the value of a penny of the tax rate. So if you were to change the tax rate by 1 penny, from 39 to 40 or 39 to 38, it equates to $117,000 this year. And so as we walk through and talk through expenses and revenues, keep in mind your biggest portion of revenue being property taxes, over 53% of your revenue. 1 cent equals $117,000.
How much?
117,000. 1 penny does. And then this we talked about just a few moments ago. We had an increase of approximately $34 million in our tax base. This shows historic tax base numbers. You'll see in 14-15 or 13-14, the number obviously is higher than it is in 14-15. That was a revalve year. I think it is important to note that revalve is coming up in 21-22, and there's definitely a lot of unknown there of what may happen as we go into that year compared to where it was a few months ago. So revalve is next fiscal year, 21-22. And then sales tax. Wanted to show, again, we talked just a few months ago, sales tax is presented on the revenue side as a gross, and then on the expenditure side, we have a fee that is paid back to Watauga County. These are the last 4 years of that gross and fee, and then the net positive number. And so when I mentioned earlier the $270,000 decrease in sales tax, that is the net number, as we're referring to there on the bottom line, $272,000-ish. And then here again is the pie chart breaking down the general fund expenditures. Central government, the 28% we'll go through as we go through the workshop is misleading. That includes the Watauga County sales tax fee, and it also includes our TDA fee payback gross number. So we'll talk about that in a few moments. That number is grossed up. If you're on the WebEx, please try to mute yourself just during this time, if you don't mind. I'm not sure who's coming unmuted. Sorry about that. It's providing feedback here. So, as we break through, police department and fire department roughly are 28% of our budget, 15 and 13, and then you can see from there the breakdown as we go around each one of our departments, street department, rec department, etc. And these numbers have not changed hardly at all from last year. And we'll go through that as we get into the workshop. And then here's our general fund capital. Last year it was 460,000, I think, is our number. This year it's 102. The majority of that is a police cruiser that includes the radio and equipment, and then some communications equipment, approximately $25,000. That's a one-time fee to upgrade our current radio consoles for our dispatch. That has been included in the proposal that's been sent to you as we include the boom cost and our one dispatcher. And then there's some just small numbers there with radios and body cams that we've included, and that's just typical replacement numbers of keeping those rotated in service and keeping those up to date. Those are obviously extremely important, and you understand why. So, moving on, if you don't have any questions, if you do, I can stop with anything.
That was for one vehicle,
One vehicle.
58 grand.
The cost of the vehicle, and when we get to the workshop, we can confirm the vehicle itself is in the low 40s. The equipment itself makes up the rest of it. We'll confirm that with Chief Miller or Ms. Norman when we get into that part. But there is a substantial amount, obviously, for the upfitting, radio, lights, et cetera, for those vehicles. Water and sewer highlights, very similar to what we saw on the general fund with rates. We have not projected or proposed rates to increase. If you remember, and we'll definitely talk about it as we go through our top 10 list or top 13 list, we have been performing a study that's still ongoing as we were planning on undergoing some fairly significant potential capital needs within the water and sewer fund. Those at this point have been proposed to be put on pause as we figure out how things are going to play out. So we've not proposed any water and sewer rate. Revenues overall are relatively flat. What we've seen the last couple months are that our usage, and I think that's telling, the majority of our usage is the minimum. And so we're seeing that revenue stay pretty flat. We're not seeing a large drop off with our hotels and motels and restaurants. So we're seeing that stay pretty flat. So we've proposed revenues to be roughly flat. Mentioned earlier about the phase 3 of the bond and the general fund being $315,000 more in debt service. It's $60,000 here. No capital outlay proposed at all within the water and sewer fund. I put mid-year there simply for the fact as we go back through and we'll talk about our top 10 list, we all know that there's some things there that we would like to potentially accomplish, and maybe that's something we can rehash mid-year depending on how the year's obviously going at that point. But no current capital outlays included. We did include $20,000 for typical line repairs and I&I repairs. Those are ongoing, and I would call that more operating than capital in a lot of ways, but it's included within our reserves. So that's a very typical amount. And then no fund balance appropriated here. So this budget on the water and sewer side, which is obviously is a separate budget, enterprise fund budget, is balanced without using any fund balance. So we're not using any savings here. And then next two slides, I believe, are just the quick pie charts with the water and sewer fund revenues, breakdown between water charges and sewer charges. The interest income is only $3,000. I see it slid over somewhere. It looks like it's bigger than that, but it's not. Sewer charges are 43%, water charges is 52%, and then there's some small miscellaneous, interconnect type charges. And then the breakdown's pretty much the same this year as in the past with our plant operations, our administrative billing, overhead, and then our field ops. Debt service. So we talked earlier about obviously phase 3 of the bond coming on, and that's approximately $375,000 total this year in new debt service. We did have some of our smaller installment debt roll off, and I'm sure you remember that's a very typical thing for us to do. Each year we normally utilize installment financing to purchase our capital, and then as that happens, usually those are on 3 or 5 year schedules. Another one rolls off. So they essentially are a wash for the most part. This year is going to be different than that because we simply don't have the capital that's going to be out there. But I think this is important just to show the trends. This is current, up to date, including phase 3. So this includes our new debt. And it shows, obviously, we're at the peak right now without any more debt being taken on at this point. And we'll talk about phase 4. There is a phase 4 to the bond that's out there that we'll talk about in a few moments. It doesn't include phase 4 of the bond, which is approximately $1.6 million, $1.7 million. But it does show what you want to see here, which is a nice declining line of total debt and debt service as you move through the next 10 years. So just to go into the debt, especially with emphasis on the bonds, bonds obviously were passed in 2014 with a 77% vote for total bonds. We were planning on issuing those in 3 phases, if I remember correctly, and we've extended that into 4 phases. Issue 1 was in 2016, issue 2 in 18, and issue 3 in 2020. Our remaining bonds to be issued of 1.695, we had originally talked about and discussed issuing potentially during this fiscal year, 2021. We have through 21-22 to potentially issue those. And so that's another conversation that we'll have as we move forward with bond issuance itself. But we've not included any additional debt service outside of phase 3 in this proposed budget. And a little difficult to see there. If you remember, if you recall, I think Ms. Norman had a chance to recap the bonds in January, especially with what had been issued and then what was remaining in phase 4. Phase 4 is approximately 1.695 million, and you'll see in front of you 623,000 of that is considered streets with sidewalks and a little bit of money in transportation. There's $431,000 left in park and recreation money. Then there's $608,000, $609,000 in water, and $32,000 in sewer. It is important to note a portion of the sidewalk money, approximately $220,000, I believe, is earmarked for the Bass Lake sidewalk match. So that number of 612 is more like 400 approximately. And I apologize if I'm off just a slight bit here, but we have not obviously issued this phase 4. I put 2021 there as more of a calendar year than a fiscal year. Moving on to the TDA. The TDA obviously has a much larger budget than the 307 that you see here. It's approximately $900,000, I believe, in total this year. The TDA has elected to include, to use some of their fund balance to balance their budget, especially on the 2/3 side. This is a summary of especially our 1/3 money that we normally utilize. This year, the majority of that, actually I apologize, the entirety of the 1/3 money is being utilized for the Memorial Park Playground portion that they agreed to pay. That's just this year's portion. That's the 150 of this year, not the prior year. And then to continue to pay the debt service on Brom of $92,615 for the parking deck, not Brom itself. I apologize for my misspoken there, for the Brom parking deck. The other items you see there with stars are monies that are part of the 2/3 portion of TDA that the town utilizes for different aspects, special events, festivals, parades, things of that nature, calendars. The admin is the portion that's paid to the town for Ms. Norman's services as the finance director for both the TDA and for the town, and obviously a portion of that to myself too for my serving on the board and assisting Mr. Brown. So in summary, the 1/3 portion of the TDA is only going to 2 areas this year, which is the playground and the Brom parking deck. And then quickly, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I wanted just to rehash our last meeting before COVID-19 was in March, and we ended that meeting obviously without a lot of COVID-19 knowledge at that point, and we ended it with an update of where we stood with our top 13 list, and we were making tremendous progress with our top 13 list. Just wanted to put this up for just a few moments. Obviously, the playground number 2 is in great progress. If you haven't had a chance to go out and see, the 2 to 5 playground is essentially in at this point. The hills are in, and the larger playground has started. So that is making great progress. Other areas have been put on pause for now, and that doesn't mean that we can't start those back up, obviously, during this fiscal year. I don't want to make that point. But without the knowledge of where we may end up, we internally push pause on a lot of these projects until we have some clarification. Street paving is obviously in progress. Sidewalk to Bass Lake is in progress. The delay there happened, unfortunately, with just a couple last minute things that we needed to finalize for the DOT, one being a proposal for oversight to the project with the engineering firm. And things have been a little bit slow right now with the DOT, and I think that's understandable. Spoke with Doug Chapman today. He's been in contact with Country Boy Landscaping, who was the bid winner, about setting up a pre-construction meeting very soon once we get that final authorization from the DOT. We expect that within the next week or so, we hope. But that project is still moving on. It is funded. Grant funding is still in place. Obviously, we talked earlier about the funding from Phase 4 to help with that match. But that project is, contracts have been signed. That project is moving along. Street paving, like I said, is obviously undergoing right now. Other things on here we can talk about as much as you would like, or we can rehash as we go through the workshop. But a lot of what you'll see here is paused for COVID-19. Just with the uncertainty of what's happening, we felt like we wanted to pause with that. That being said, that was my last slide for the presentation before we get into the workshop. No, it's a little quick, maybe not quick enough for some, maybe too quick, but just wanted to put some things out there that summarized a pretty difficult budget for a lot of folks. So just wanted to put that out there and be glad to answer any questions that you may have on the presentation before we get into the workshop.
When does Brown Parking come off of, when is it paid in full?
23, I think.
23?
I was,
I saw that.
yeah, I would have said 24, 23, 24.
23.
Yeah, maybe the 23, 24 year is what it is. So, a few more years.
Okay.
Okay. All right, everyone on WebEx, you're now up on the big screen, so everyone can wave at the council, and council can wave
Hey,
at them.
guys.
Ms. Norman said 2425 for the parking.
24.25.
2425 for the parking.
All right.
24, 25.
Yep, 2024, 2025 for the TDA parking there.
Okay.
TDA funded portion of the parking, I should say.
Right. But it will be paid off then.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I think it's without saying, I did not include anything from obviously the 2019-20 year, but I believe we all understand that we were on pace to set records in every aspect of revenues this year. There's still some uncertainty, like I said, with sales tax. We feel like we are pretty close with our TDA revenues simply for the fact that we did not have short-term rentals for a majority of March or all of April and the majority of May. So we are in hopes, and I know Ms. Powell can speak to the TDA meeting that took place. We are in hopes that there is some recovery in the month of June towards those revenues. But yeah, unfortunately, our record-setting year came to a pretty quick halt in the middle of March with what we were hoping to accomplish.
Where would you like to start on your,
Okay, does everyone have their books in front of you? I essentially, I'm going to remove my jacket with heat here. I believe, recaptured the majority of the budget message. We can definitely go back and talk about the budget message. If you want to start on page 27, that's kind of the first summary slide, I guess, that gets us into the details of the budget, if that's okay with everyone. And again, everyone on WebEx, all the department heads, if just unmute yourself if you need to speak, obviously. Starting with page 27, if everybody has that in front of them, operating budget summary. The reason I thought we would start here is, again, just to emphasize a couple things. One, if you look at the numbers themselves, if you look at 2021 recommended, especially with the general fund, it looks like revenues and expenses are essentially the same as they were last year. You don't see the decreases or the increases that I was speaking to earlier. So I wanted to start here just to talk through one accounting thing of the night. As you know, obviously I spent some time in the accounting world, so I wanted to point this out because I think it's important. If you'll put your finger on page 32, and we won't do this again tonight, but if you'll put it on page 32, and then again on 39, so use 3 fingers.
We only have 10.
I don't have any more, just those. So page 27 is the summary of both revenues and expenditures. 32 is a detailed listing of that summary on the revenue side, and 39 is taking you into what we call our central government. And the reason that we've got our fingers on these places, if you go over to page 32, and you go about midway down, you'll see, let's go back to page 32. Towards the top, you'll see our sales tax subtotal at 1.287 million. It's the second section there. If you go to the far right, recommended 1.287 million. You'll see a $600,000 decrease almost there compared to last year. Again, that's a gross number. If you go down to the middle of the page, the second line in the big block on page 32, it's account number 3,400,326. You'll see a number of $917,970. The reason I'm pointing this out, if you look at last year, 1920 adopted, you see 421,000. So I just finished telling you that our TDA is projecting a 40% decrease, but it looks like there's a $500,000 increase here. Last year during the audit process, we were informed that we needed to start showing the gross amount, not the net. What you see here on the 421 was our net number, essentially, last year. The gross would have been much higher, well over $1 million. The 917 this year is a gross number. The only way to make that understand from a netting standpoint is to go over to page 39, and right in the middle of the page, far right, you'll see a $600,000, $630,000 number, 630,850 fee. 855. That's a new expense that was not there last year. That's the other gross. That's the gross expenditure side. So in order to get a real net number for the TDA, you must take the 917 minus the 630. Obviously, that comes in much less than it did last year at $421,000. So I wanted to point that out. That was an accounting change. That was not anything internal that was driven. That was strictly an accounting change to show the gross versus the net. And then also on that same page, number 39, and we'll come to it in just a few moments, you'll see where our Watauga County sales tax fee is paid from. That $589,000 is paid out of that account. So if we go back to page 27, I say, again, the $8.66 million in revenue for the general fund is somewhat misleading this year when you're trying to compare apples to apples, because it's not. That number is more than approximately 8.1 million, not 8.6 million. Reason being, we had to gross up our TDA and our occupancy tax. So I wanted to point that out. And then as you go down to the operating by category, especially under operating and maintenance, it looks like the 3.453 number is actually slightly higher than last year, when I just finished telling you that the operating expenditures were down 10%. Again, it's because of the gross up of the TDA number that's included in there. That number is approximately 2.9 million, not 3.45 million. So just wanted to clarify that. Didn't want you to go through and think that the numbers that I was presenting to you were incorrect by any means. When you look at it here, it looks like we're comparing apples to apples. That's an important note to have, is that we're now grossing up our TDA revenue.
Why are we now doing that?
Change in auditor, change in preference in the auditor themselves. So we had been with a former audit firm that had not really shined a light on the net. The results are the same. You know, the end result is the same thing, but audit firm prefers the gross method versus the net method. And in accounting terms, that's exactly what it's called. You have a gross method and a net method. And so we've been netting, and now we're grossing.
Wasn't that also at one time recommended by the state?
Yes.
Okay.
The state feels like if a reader were to pick up the TDA's financials and you have gross numbers, you should pick up the town's financials and see the same gross numbers. Again, like I said, net results are the same, but it's a presentation, so. Any questions on page 27? I wanted to point that out.
Can you enlighten me a little bit about the Brac Fund?
Yes, so the Brac Fund is the Blown Rock, obviously, advisory appearance and advisory committee. I think is the proper term, and I'm sure Ms. Brown's cringing with me saying that. We do have some slides, or we have some pages in here that break down the $37,000 this year of what that goes to. Yeah, so if you want me to wait, I'll break it down in just a few moments, actually. We go through that, so. You do see an increase there, and the reason for that increase we'll talk about in a few moments, but we have asked them to fund an additional $10,000 this year that the TDA normally funded out of the 1/3 money. So we'll talk about that in just a few moments if you want to. Okay, if not, moving on to page 28. Here again, a little bit more of a breakdown. This is revenues by source that we had the pie chart up a few moments ago looking at, and then expenditures by department or by function that we had the pie chart up a few moments ago looking at. Property taxes, occupancy tax, sales tax, et cetera, as we go down through here. Really, you don't see a lot of change outside of your top three within the middle. ABC, or state collected, which is our utility franchise, POW bill money, essentially projected to be the same this year. ABC revenue increased last year from 65 to 85. Again, projected to be 85,000 again next year. The ABC board passed their budget today, actually, I believe, that included that $85,000 coming to the town. Our solid waste, we kept the same amount from last year, remained the same. Other revenue and the fund balance appropriated, I think we can spend just a few moments on. Other revenue, again, if you want to get really into the granular side of things, and it's on page 32, and we'll get there in just a few moments, but I'll point out to you the majority of the other revenue are things like the fire department contribution, interest income, miscellaneous income, proceeds from sale of assets, proceeds from debt, et cetera. So we'll get into the details of that as we go on to page 32. And then again, this just shows the breakdown from each one of the departments on the expenditure side. Each one outside of central government, which includes the gross up number, each one should show a relatively stable number or a decrease within the operating side. Yes, sir, Mr. Madison.
I will add something I have in here is that we may see a little bit of increase to the power bill. A lot of that has been asked that the governor a little bit more, that let's send a little bit more into the power bill this year.
Perfect.
We may get lucky and see just a little bit of increase there.
That would be nice. I think it's been several years since we've seen an increase in the POW bill fund, so that'd be a nice increase to have. And again, I didn't point out just a few moments ago, this document still has the $300,000 as fund balance appropriated. If we utilize the reserve funding, that number will be 180, not 300,000. So I want to make sure I clarify that. Anything else on 28? If not, page 29 is our Brac Fund. So our Blowing Rock Appearance Advisory Commission Fund Summary. So I got it right there. The majority of our funding in the past has gone towards things like our plant landscaping materials, assistance with the water truck, things of that nature. But Brac has always been tremendous in helping the town fund anything appearance related. They've funded portions of Christmas lights in the past. This past year, I know they funded a portion of the trees in Memorial Park to be lit. So their revenues are derived from donations. So they send out letters each year asking for donations, general donations, donations towards the hanging baskets that you see on Main Street, cemetery donations, et cetera. So they do a tremendous job, very consistent job in their donation collection. So one of the things that we realized early on was with the TDA revenue obviously projected at 40% less. Several things within the TDA budget and we'll get there as we go through this book. Several things that the TDA had contributed to in the past were not going to be feasible this year. Our 1/3 money obviously had dropped approximately 120,000 I said earlier, so that's a pretty significant decrease. Town center beautification monies that were contributed from the TDA to the town was not going to be possible given the TDA's budget. So Brac met today and decided as a board that they would like to contribute an additional $10,000 towards the town's center beautification, and that's landscaping type expenses, etc. That $10,000 is coming from their fund balance. I believe their fund balance, and Ms. Norman can unmute herself, is approximately $27,000, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Ms. Norman?
Yes, that's correct. It's approximately 27,000.
So the 27,000, they are appropriating at this point $10,000 of the 27 to assist the town in balancing the budget towards those items that they've been instrumental in funding in the past, which is landscaping and beautification. Ms. Brown, anything to add to that? I know you were in the meeting today and I was not able to attend.
No, they were very positive, though, about helping, because I know originally they had talked about holding on to fund balance because they were unsure of what donations would be like this upcoming year, and they want to make sure that they can still have the hanging baskets and the planters and all the flowers, but they felt like that there could possibly be even more fund balance at the end of this fiscal year, so they felt comfortable in participating.
So very appreciative, obviously, of Brac assisting the town in funding. Any questions on Brac? Did I answer your question, Mr. Hartwood?
Dave, did you have a question?
Got an inch.
Oh, okay.
There was a significant increase.
I think it says a lot. I mean, what you always hear in town is how pretty our downtown is. And so I think that hats off to our department people in Brac and TDA. I tell you, it's
Absolutely, and I think it's, Blowing Rock, we all know is it begins with essential services, protection, police, fire, et cetera, but all of our departments, in my opinion, and I think you would all agree, are essential in landscaping, park and rec. The beautification of the town is what brings people here, and so very, very appreciative of Brac coming to the table with an additional $10,000 to help fund this year's budget. Page 30, I believe, is our last summary page before we get into the departments. This is the Water and Sewer Fund. As mentioned earlier, you'll see a pretty consistent revenue number, a slight decrease in recommended revenue, but relatively flat as a whole. And then as you go down through the other revenue sources, we took a conservative approach with some of the impact fees, not knowing how development may be in 2019 or 2021. So you'll see a little decrease there, approximately 50% on the water side and roughly 50% on the sewer side. Again, just being conservative and unknowing of what may take place there. Interest income is a part of miscellaneous income. Overall, we'll talk about interest income. No, I'm sorry, interest income's up above. Interest income overall, we'll talk about. We took a very, very conservative approach there, not knowing with the markets, et cetera, what type of interest rates we may be receiving. But overall, again, we'll get into some of the more detail as we get through the different departments into the water and sewer fund. But this budget is balanced with zero as appropriated fund balance. So we have not utilized any of the current fund balance that exists within the water and sewer fund. Page 31 is a whole lot of numbers about taxes. So I won't go through, obviously, all of this. I think it's important to note that, obviously, if you start at the top, Watauga County and Caldwell makes up, obviously, our full tax assessed value. 91.5% is Watauga, and 8.5% resides within Caldwell County, makes up our 100%. A graphic at the bottom, I think it's always important to know. If you look at our Blowing Rock property tax summary over the last 20 years, you'll see a up and down approach, obviously with revalves and things of that nature that have taken place over the years. The last three revalves, 2002, 2003, you see a significant drop there, I think from about 46 cents to 30 cents. And then you see a fairly flatlined approach until you get to 06, 07, another revalve year. And then in 14, 15, you'll see a slight tick up. And then, of course, thereafter, you'll see increases, most notably due to the debt service plan that was put into place to pay for the bonds. And we'll talk about that as we get into the debt service slides of where we stand with that and what's remaining. If I'm moving too fast or too slow, let me know. Page 32, revenues. Starting at the top, this is general fund revenues. So this is not the water and sewer fund. This is just general fund revenues. Property taxes we discussed earlier at 4.6 million. That's approximately 3% higher than they were last year due to our increase in our base. Sales tax at 1.287 or 1.288 gross is approximately 30% less than last year when you net out the fee that's being paid back to Watauga. State collected subtotal, which is our franchise tax, our telecommunication tax, you can read there, PAL bill. We've kept those relatively flat. A lot of uncertainty, in other areas. This is a pretty stable area of revenue for us. Hopefully, PAL bill comes in higher. Mr. Matheson's correct, and we end up receiving more. Our solid waste recycling will remain the same at this point. No rate increases, no fee increases proposed. And then we get into some of the more detailed revenues. We talked earlier about our occupancy tax number being $918,000. Obviously, that's an accounting change. Hard to compare that to $421 last year and $384 the year before. Building permits, relatively flat. Same with zoning and short-term rental applications. We kept those conservative and flat. You will see a fairly significant decrease in our interest income. Interest income is one of those, again, that we're unsure of. Obviously, if rates continue to be decreased by the Federal Reserve, then we'll receive less in interest income. So we took a very conservative approach there. Proceeds from long-term debt, the 205 last year was to pay for our capital. The 102 this year is a placeholder to potentially pay for that capital. That's the reason for a decrease there. Miscellaneous income, 12,000 this year to 25. Not sure if I know the full details there. Ms. Norman, do you know what makes up miscellaneous income? I'm guessing proceeds, perhaps. Put you on the spot. I think you're on mute if you're talking.
Yeah, those are like when people pay for golf cart registrations, and I think we get some court costs that come in there. It's just like a plethora of smaller amounts. Sometimes we typically get Brimco capital credits for our light bill. That's what makes that number up.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
ABC revenue, relatively the same with the enforcement, and the revenue itself, $85,000 this year, same as $85,000 last year. That comes directly from the ABC board that was passed, the budget was passed today. Ice house rental stayed the same. That's an annual lease that is coming up in September for the ice house rental. Cemetery at $20,000 stayed the same from last year. Fire department contribution, that's a direct reimbursement from the fire department for particular individuals, so that number did not change. We left that the same with the same individuals that we're covering as part of the town portion. And then from there on down through the recreation portion, without going through each one of those, in total, we decreased those numbers by 50%. So we have a 50% decrease in our recreation fees. Obviously, that includes a lot of things: the rentals of our buildings, the day camps, the pool, the concessions, the kinder activities. A lot of these do cover, 2 summers, so we did leave some of those in there. We're hopeful, obviously, next year summer camp will be back, and we did cut summer camp, I believe, roughly in half, because we are, again, in hopes that summer camp's back next year. But we ended up taking a 50% decrease here. So essentially, we cut out 1 year's worth of summer revenues, and that may be a conservative number. We may end up obviously opening the pool and have some revenues there, but we wanted to err on the side of caution. And then our reimbursements from DOT for snow removal. Sell of fixed assets varies. We probably will not sell many fixed assets this year because we're not replacing many fixed assets. Actually, we're not replacing only just one fixed asset. So we'll make the attempt, obviously, to keep our fixed assets a little bit longer. And we'll talk about that as we get into the fleet maintenance side and some of the expenses there.
So DOT hasn't really increased that reimbursement in spite of increased gas prices.
It appears, Ms. Norman, did you hear the question from Ms. Sweeting about the increase from the DOT? That number has not changed, it looks like, in 4 years. Is that correct?
That, I believe, is our snow reimbursement, and that is very variable because it really depends on how much snow we get as to how much material we use. Matt has to do a report every year to the state, and so it does vary. We just typically budget it pretty flat.
So they give us what we report. Do we
Basically,
include,
we've spent. I'm
do
sorry.
we include gas, Matt? Is that just salt or is that,
It's salt and equipment costs. There's rates on each piece of equipment. Matt, you see, you're going to jump in.
Yeah, that covers the material, the manpower, the pay rate for the guys that are actually running the equipment, and then all the equipment itself, be it the truck, the plows, the spreader. It's all broken down on a set rate, and this year that number is probably going to be pretty low. We did put some salt out, but we didn't have a whole lot of hours pushing snow, so it doesn't look like it's going to be a really large number this year at all.
okay, thank you.
And then moving down the list, again, self-fixed assets we talked about. The fund balance appropriation number at $300,000 would be $180 as of this afternoon. And then the remaining portion are transfers ins from internal departments, capital project departments, the Brac for watering. That's the increase there from the $3,000 to the $13,000. We put for watering in there, but that's for all things landscaping in general. And then the management allocation to utility fund, that's a fancy way of saying that the water and sewer fund pays for our administrative cost that we contribute to that fund. So again, on the accounting side, the water and sewer fund is separate. It's an enterprise fund compared to the general fund. We're able to accumulate any administrative time that goes towards that fund and recoup those costs. So again, the bottom three numbers are internal monies being passed from one fund to another within the capital projects, the Brac, or within the enterprise fund, water and sewer fund. Any questions on revenues?
One quick question, 3400-380, park lease. What is that? Ms. Norman can weigh in. I believe the park lease is the rental of is that gazebo and other areas?
That's the chambers, what they pay, the fee for the farmer's market and art in the park.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Do we need to add a footnote of the occupancy tax from the net gross?
We certainly can. So add a footnote that clarifies at the bottom what the reason for the increase.
Has to be reflected in change.
Yes.
Yeah, from the net to gross, just.
Did you hear that, Ms. Norman?
That's
Which increase is that?
To add a footnote at the bottom of the revenue summary and at the bottom of the central government to allow the reader to have knowledge of the gross reporting of the occupancy tax versus the net.
Okay.
Yeah, good point. Okay, moving on to page 33, the expenditure summary sheet. You have at your desk, I emailed you a copy earlier today, so there's a replacement that's going to happen already. Page 33 is going to be replaced with what you have in front of you. The totals did not change, obviously. Actually, none of the totals changed, but there was a formula error between what was happening with our salaries and our other area. So when we changed the police dispatch area that we'll get to in a few moments, that number was being picked up in other versus in salaries. So it looked like we had a decrease in salaries and a large increase in other. The one that's at your desk shows the replacement pay, shows the right numbers. And so for anyone at home that doesn't have it in front of you, salaries as reported at 2.7 million is now 2.828 million. Group insurance did not change, but the other category went from 914 to $786,000. So the totals are still the same. The total is still 4,028,831, but there was a change there to the formula for the dispatch. So we apologize for that. But what it shows with the replacement page, it shows the personnel obviously cost being almost flat from last year. It shows our operating again flat, but that includes the gross number that we talked about earlier. That includes the TDA fee. And then there's our capital, $102,000 compared to this $429 last year. And then the $150 is our playground that's coming from the TDA. So that number is included in other. Again, that's the TDA portion coming across to that. And then there's our debt service total. Our phase 3 increased debt. We did have some installment debt roll off. Okay, moving on into the departments. First, we'll go into the governing body, which is page 35. It is you all. Almost no change here other than our, as you go through each one of our departments, you'll see our group insurance number actually is slightly less this year. We projected a much larger increase last year than what actually took place. What we're projecting this year is we feel like it's much more accurate. So the decrease is not actuals to budget, it's budget to budget. So when you look at last year's adopted budget for group insurance at $28,000 versus $25,000, the $28,000 was a little bit overestimated last year. So I want to make that point as we go through each one, you'll see something very similar to that. Slight decrease here in travel. Again, that's based on actuals. The $9,500, I believe, last year was a little bit estimated in what we spent within the travel. And again, that's the council's travel. But overall, 51,682 total versus 56,000 last year. So it's about a 15% decrease. Any questions?
So, does that travel reflect that we had, that we saved money coming here?
By not going to
By not going to Asheville?
Ms. Norman, is that the retreat a part of that number?
It is.
So that would obviously account for some of the decrease too. So,
Okay.
okay. Moving on to page 37, which is our finance and administration. Most notable change here from a personnel standpoint is that you're not looking for me this year, so that cost is no longer a part of it. So there's no relocation reimbursement, so that essentially is the full reason for the decrease in personnel. We're also not including any part-time salaries for interns or anything of that nature, so we're hoping that will be, interns will be free this year as we go through that process. And Mr. Rothrock is the same when you get to the planning side.
Just answered my question.
True internships versus paid internships. And then a slight decrease as you go down through the operating side within miscellaneous. I think that's some miscellaneous cost, accounts receivable software upgrades, $2,000 in that. But again, I think we were a little bit over last year. But just a small fraction of a decrease overall as we go through utilities, a little slight uptick with our current telephone bill, et cetera. Those are on actuals. But overall, looking at total expenditures being down approximately $15,000 within this department. Ms. Powell, you have a question? I'm sorry.
I was thinking, nobody's here, we might have saved a little power bill, a little bit here and there.
We may have. I don't know if we've begun to analyze our power savings at this point, but that we will get to that, I promise. If no questions, moving on to central government, which is where we were just a few moments ago, flipping back and forth. This is probably, I would consider a catch-all department. There's a lot of things in here, so we'll go through this if it's okay with you. and talk about some of the changes. Legal services, 25,000 this year compared to 15. You'll see on Tuesday night's agenda, you'll see a budget amendment where we're actually utilizing some of our available budget in other areas to help offset some of our increase in legal expenses. This year, compared to other years, we've had an increase because of several things that we've had going on. Some of our cases that we've been updating you on, short-term rentals, our Gideon Ridge, et cetera. So our overall cost is a little bit higher. So the $25,000 was a $10,000 increase. That again is somewhat of an unknown as we go into this year. We know those cases continue. We wanted just to increase it somewhat to give us a placeholder there. Those numbers again are an estimate of what we potentially could spend. But we know $15,000 this year was not quite enough as we're coming to the end of the year with what we've spent on some of our legal fees.
And that's Alan's fees for the Tuesday evenings, council meetings, and so on. Is
Correct, and his fee has not changed, his standard fee.
Really?
The reason for the increase is 100% due to the fact that we have ongoing legal cases that he's been involved in.
Okay.
Like Gideon Ridge?
That is
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
And our short-term rental case that's been going for quite some time now.
It also includes for the transcribed, for this year, the transcribed meetings that, I think there was 2 or 3 of those.
Okay.
With the quasi-judicial, I guess, process, is that right, Ms. Norman? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we're hoping we don't have those this year, the lengthy ones at least. Moving below audit fee, that's a contract amount that we agreed to with Martin Starnes. I believe we have a 3-year contract with them. This will be year 2. Is that correct, Ms. Norman? And the $27,000 was a part of that original contract amount that was approved.
That is correct, and that includes some additional GASB work that I think we're going to pay Kavanaugh McDonald to do. So that's why there's a slight increase from 1920. That would be to cover that.
Is that part of the post-employment benefit study, actuary study?
That is part of it. We have, yes, OPEB and the Leo separation allowance and possibly some new pronouncements.
Okay.
So that ends 21-22.
The contract
Yeah.
would be 21-22. It's a 3-year contract. Is that correct, Ms. Norman?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, thank you.
Going down, I don't see really any changes until we get to the IT support services. Last year, that was at $49,000. This year at $31,000. That included and I don't know the number, Ms. Norman may be able to tell you, some capital, some purchases of new computers. We've made some of those purchases this year. Some others are reflected within some of the departments themselves, but I think that's primarily the reason for the decrease. Is that correct? The decrease in capital with the new computers?
Yes, last year it included the new computers and equipment.
Okay. No decrease there from an ongoing standpoint, recurring standpoint, just the capital.
What is, kind of an offshoot question, what is our threshold for depreciation?
For computers,
Yeah, or anything?
it varies. Internally, I guess we have probably I don't know if our policy internal matches the depreciation or if we try to extend it a little bit further. Computers, I believe, are 3 years rotating depreciation schedule. What an auditor would tell you would be 3 years on a computer.
Well, I was thinking we put it on a depreciation schedule after $3,000, $1,000?
Oh, the threshold.
Yeah, the threshold.
Ms. Norman, would you like to answer that? The threshold for capitalizing an asset.
5,000.
Good, okay, thank you.
Could any of that reflection also be, how much now that people like Thomas and Kent are helping us out now, they run?
There is a portion that's included here for services outside of our Nordic contract. That's currently a payment going to just.
I was looking at the drop, you know.
That's right. No.
With them being able to do the things they do. It's helping us not call IT as much.
We've not changed that, and currently, I'm sure Thomas is in the other room. We have not talked to him about any potential compensation or anything of that nature for what he's been doing. So, But no, there's no decrease there. We've been very fortunate to utilize their services at this point for free.
So we pay the community library $2,000 a year
We do.
for,
Ongoing support. Ms. Norman, do you have a better way of putting that?
That has been a very historical, well before my time, contribution from the town to the library. That's all
have
that
you
I.
talked to them about, since we're in a state of emergency, COVID, like Brac has increased their donation, maybe we can talk to them about, I mean, it's just $2,000, but still it all adds up.
Have we ever gotten any revenues or expenditures from them, a report that tells us why they need the 2,000?
I don't believe so. Ms. Norman, have you ever been provided with anything?
No, I have never been
That might
provided
be
anything.
something
I've
we
never
wanna ask.
myself. I don't know if managers previously have asked, but I've never been told that anybody asked or received any.
I can ask, absolutely.
Are they currently on a 99-year lease or within a 99-year lease with the town?
I believe that is correct, and I think we have looked that up even since my tenure here, and I couldn't give you the year, maybe 2032. Is that, Ms. Powell
Roll down.
may know more than us. So.
Okay. What do they pay us for the lease?
What do they pay us? I believe is $1 a year, if any. Yeah, I think it's, Ms. Norman, do you know the answer to that?
Okay.
Okay, I've never received any funds
Really?
from them. I think it is supposed to be $1 a year.
Okay. So we're having a $1,999
Have you ever
net
paid that
loss.
dollar?
19,000.
Have you ever gotten a dollar from them, Nicole? Have you, honestly?
The answer is no. The
Okay.
answer is no.
What was the question?
If she's ever gotten that dollar a year.
We taking it off to 2,000.
Moving forward,
Please.
as we go down the list, please stop me if you would like to talk about anything. Election expense was what I had here as my next note. 0 this year. Obviously, it's not an election year for us, so that is why that is 0 versus 9,000 last year. Continuing moving down as we get into again the big number with the TDA that wasn't there last year, $631,000. And then we come to what we call our Watauga County sales tax fee. That is where the 70% above and beyond what would have been collected normally under the per capita method is being repaid to the county. So that is what makes up that $590,000 this
And
year.
that reflects a net number.
That's the number
net.
that actually goes back to them. That's an actual, yeah. So if you take the 1.287 total sales tax number, you have to back out the 590 to get to what we actually collect and
Okay.
utilize in sales tax.
Where is the suit that Boone has brought against the county regarding the sales tax distribution? Were they given a year extension?
I have not heard, honestly, during this COVID process, I've not heard if an extension was given. I know everything was put on pause, obviously with the court system. It was originally to be heard, I guess at the end of March was the rescheduling date, or the 1st of April. And so we need to follow up and get clarification of where we stand with that. The suit I have asked is still in place. It has not been dropped, but I don't know if there's dates that's been given at this point to when.
So there's a chance that next year this whole thing could change for us.
I think depending on the outcome of the suit, if it follows through, it could be a number of different variables there that could play out.
So currently we started out, as I remember, returning 50%, correct?
Yeah.
Is
Ms.
that
Norman?
right? And it went up to 60 and now we're at 70?
Correct.
Returned.
Yeah.
returned.
What is 10%? Like, what does that equal if we were to drop it to 60%? What income
84.
would that give us?
84,250.
She's got the numbers at her hands.
Boy, I tell you what, she is on it. Okay.
Right out of her head.
And, okay, and there's no written agreement that we have to, correct? Give them 70% or,
There's not a current agreement.
because 84,000 would be nice.
I believe the proclamation that was adopted in 14 by the council at that time followed with several years of an agreement that has not been
Changed.
signed in several
Oh,
years.
so-
Yeah,
okay.
has not been sent or signed in several years.
So 20, okay. So for 6 years, we've been giving them, or 5 years, we've been giving them back.
I think fiscal year ending 14 was the first year.
Yeah, I remember for 5 years, we've been getting a whole lot more money than we've been used to get also.
Yeah, but I think that could change, because
Yeah,
of
it
moves
could
too.
change. They could flip it back and we could be getting a whole lot later.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that they're gonna do that.
I wouldn't trust them, I wouldn't threaten them.
Well, I just think, we're taking money out of our fund balance, and part of that money goes, an 84,000, we could drop that.
I'm still saying that we're still getting over 200, 300,000 more than what we would normally get. And if you want to push it, that could be reverted back and we could be going back, we get 200,000, 300,000 less than what we're getting now.
That's right.
Well, I think we gotta look at what they don't give us. They gave us the same amount for COVID money that they gave, Beach Mountain and, Seven Devils, which have a third of the population we have. So there was nothing there. They gave us 12,000 a year for, Parks and Rec. Yet if you look at our Parks and Rec use, the majority on it, probably 5 or 6 things, is out of county.
That's reverted back this year. I think you can check with Jennifer that we're in charge of scheduling now, not the county.
No, I know that. That's as
Correct.
far as scheduling but I'm talking like kinder basketball, adult tennis. I mean, if you look at what I saw in here, a lot of them, probably 70% is out of county or out of town. The other thing is the SRO. We've been supporting them, and they've done nothing to even offer to give us anything for that, and we're supporting, there are counties, students.
Well, that was our choice on the SRO.
That's
It
right.
had nothing to do with the county.
Yep.
That was our choice.
Yeah, we made
Yeah, but
that
I'm
choice.
saying, when we've asked for them to help us, they have not put it in their budget.
Well-
And that officer is how much?
58?
Ms. Norman, the question was SRO with capitalized cost. Do you have that number close?
Yeah, approximately 68,000.
You're close.
Well,
And that's with card, correct? That's with the card or without the card?
I think Aaron's saying without a card, correct, Aaron?
I don't
I
see.
think you're on mute, Aaron.
I'm trying. And that is without a car. That does not include a car.
So 68 without the card, okay.
That's just personnel.
let me ask for clarification. The county has 2 options on repayment of taxes from us. If they opted to go to the old option, which was per capita,
Per capita, based on
Okay.
population.
we would lose what?
I believe this year alone, is it 252 or 256, Ms. Norman?
Miss Norman changed.
Huh?
Well, we would go from, we would lose 842,550. You can see that on page 32. We've been tracking it and keeping the two amounts separate, what we would collect under the per capita method and what we are collecting under the ad valorem method.
Where is that under?
But we wouldn't have the repayment, right? So it would be the net of the 845 plus the fee, is that right?
That's true, yes.
So
yes.
in other words, to Doug's point, we have two options here. And unfortunately, we're not in a very good position to negotiate with them, which I don't understand, frankly.
That's what we're into.
That's just the way it is.
I'm sorry.
I think we'll let it sleep the dog away, frankly.
You know, I mean, I don't disagree with you, Sue, but it's almost like I feel our hands are tied. Yeah,
Maybe we get somebody elected to inform.
We've got leverage to lose money. Big time. But I agree with Sue, everything you say, but
yeah.
those savings don't amount up to what could happen.
So it's the 300,000 that you're worried about.
Mhm.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah,
Well, what seems to be unfair is all the biases with the county.
yeah.
Right.
And we're all in agreement there.
But I mean,
What do we do?
you know, we've been through a couple of administrations with the county and it doesn't change.
Well, I also think this year we may have had, going in before COVID, a little bit better chance of it being reduced. But with the hit that everybody is taking on that, I don't see that happen, you know, I don't see that happen.
Well,
Everybody's operating
had any,
at good profits this year, you know.
have we had any input from county government as to why we get the same amount as Beach Mountain and Seven Devils from that windfall they got?
Yeah, so we did receive clarification during the county commissioners meeting. I think the clarification was given on how the amount was determined. So $20,000 was given to each municipality. And then $1 per person population was given on top of that. So for us, the 21,280 equaled 20,000 plus 1,280 people. Beach Mountain is obviously significantly less. That's why they were 20,000 plus 400 or 500. Seven Devils, same way. Boone was at 16,000 and something population, so 16,000 plus 20 gave them the 36. So they gave everyone 20,000 flat, a flat fee, and then $1 per person on top of that.
We have to remember that they didn't have to give us anything.
And I do want to make the point, that number, that amount's not included in this year's, in this budget. That number, obviously, we did not feel comfortable putting in here. That's a reimbursement number, so we are obviously having to file for reimbursement for that. So that's not included in our budget.
What, have you figured out the cost of COVID as far as PPE or cleaning supplies? Do you have any of that?
We do. I know Ms. Norman has been obviously preparing that to file for reimbursements. It's several $1,000s. It's not a tremendous amount compared to a lot of other places. I think you have that PPE, right? Mask and gloves and sanitation, et cetera.
Too much.
Which will increase as we open up more.
That's right.
Yes, it's about 3,500 at where we have it right now for the COVID expenses for gloves, face masks, hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies.
From a personnel standpoint, we've not incurred any additional cost. We elected early on to rotate individuals, keep folks obviously safe and working from home remotely. So we've not incurred any additional cost from a personnel standpoint because of that. Moving on, you'll see several things next that we did not include this year. One, the Recodification Project. That money was in there last year and paid to the company for the recodification, and work has begun on that. We were hoping to get a lot further along with them as what we have, so they're still working with us. So there's no number in there because there's no cost right now moving forward with that. We've paid them the money from last year, so they're still owing us the product at this
Can you
point.
tell David what that is, because I think.
Yeah, similar to any code, obviously, just recodification amendments, changes, upgrades to our current code.
We know, you have any idea we may end up with that?
It's more on me and with Kevin and others right now, we've not reached out to them to help them finish some of that because of some of the things that have been going on. That's been put on pause. So that lies with me. I apologize for that.
Have you, as new manager, reviewed that, and is staff capable of doing that?
Yes, absolutely. I think our staff is by far the most capable of providing them what they need to help with that process. I think there's recommendations and things of that nature that are worthy, absolutely, but I think we know our code better than anyone, or what's needed, from an amendment change standpoint with a lot. Not fully, but the majority, I would say, absolutely.
So after they get through this, does that mean that our personnel can do this on a quarterly basis and go through and update? Or do we need to pay another $8,000?
No, I don't think so. I think we can do it, yeah, going forward, absolutely.
Okay.
Apple Cart, this is $20,000 that is not included this year. We obviously talked about that a couple weeks ago with the choice to cancel Apple Cart this summer, so that's not included. The $5,000 for short-term rental helper contract, this is our software. Last year, that was at $14,500. Thanks to Ms. Norman and I believe Mr. Brown, a lot of negotiation took place that we weren't utilizing the majority of that software. We were utilizing the software for really just a couple things, and Ms. Norman can definitely weigh in. She had those conversations, but through those conversations, we still have the software. We're still utilizing it for the same purposes, but we're only being charged $5,000 going forward. Is that correct, Ms. Norman? Mute.
Reverse.
That is correct, sorry.
So, does that mean that they have somebody that's looking at the home away from home and that we were originally told that we would have somebody 24/7 that would be looking? Because I'm having complaints again about people short-term rental.
I don't think anybody's looking 24/7. I think that, they have the ability to check at any point in time. But I think they're just doing that periodically or as the complaints come up. Kevin could probably maybe speak to that.
Where is he?
Kevin, are you there?
What was the question?
The short-term rental software, do you know how that's operating right now with them checking and what the software company itself is doing, how that's being done?
No, I don't. Tammy knows more how it works than I do, unfortunately. And Tracy does too. Tracy's contact with them is a lot more often.
We'll get you the answers there.
They do what they call a scrape
Yeah.
of the internet. I don't know how often, but it's periodic. I don't think it's 24 hours a day, no.
But am I correct in saying we receive that report and then Tammy takes that report and matches that up with what we have in the way of short-term rental, known applications, et cetera, and that's how we end up deriving the potential violators, the comparison?
Yes, it has to be. We have to partner with them because some of the things that they come up with are not, some are not in town, some are legitimate and where they're supposed to be. So it's a team approach so we can verify which ones are violations.
I've had Tammy walk me through her process when she receives the report and she goes through and first she filters out the addresses that are outside of the town limits. There's some that always we pick up based on a zip code, et cetera. And then from there, she compares that, I believe, to what we know we have in applications and short-term rentals and payers. And then that's where she comes up with her list.
How many violators in the last 6 months?
Ooh. Any clue about violators in the last 6 months?
Last 6 months?
None?
Probably none.
Sue, you said
The
you've had,
The violations would be anyone, the last 3 months, anyone that's actually renting legal places. But before that, back through January, I don't think we've had any.
Sue, you're just gonna have to, these,
Slow time of year.
these people that have complained to you, you just need to make sure they voice their concerns to
They have.
town hall. Have they?
That's the problem, that's what I was asking.
Okay.
It seems the question is, do we need to spend this money anyway? Now,
Yes.
I think we do.
Yeah, the reason we pared it down was there was a lot of things that I know, and I'm not sure if it derived or started with Tammy or Miss Norman or where. I apologize for not knowing, but I know that it was brought to our attention. There was a lot of the software that we weren't ever going to use because it was made for much larger areas, and we weren't needing that. We really did need them to provide us with that scraping listing of what they were getting from the internet that we could then take and compare, and that's what we're using it for. And that was the reason. I believe, Ms. Norman, is that correct? That was the reason for the decrease. We simply aren't utilizing the majority of the software the way that it was created.
but it seems like we
That's
started out
correct.
with a big bang for the buck, and now,
Well, I think COVID's played a lot of,
I appreciate getting the cost down, thing.
that's a huge discount.
Then moving down, lots of zeros until you get to the bottom. The $10,000 we left in there the same. That majority of that is for our employee Christmas parties, gifts, and any retirements we may have. So we obviously did not change that with just a lot of unknown. We're in hopes that we have a Christmas party, of course. And then following below, you'll see the 150 transfer to capital projects. That's from the TDA for the playground. And then there is our large increase, over $300,000 in our debt service, and that is all because of phase 3 in the bond.
okay, I have a request for a recess.
Okay?
Say
Everyone at
12
home,
and a half minutes,
a recess for how long?
15 minutes.
15 minutes. Make sure you turn your camera off if you're doing anything that you don't want us to see. 41, public buildings and grounds, 30,000 with our contracted cleaning service. That is our contract with Bunnies that cleans our buildings and our bathrooms. Moving on down the list into our operating, the only real change that you'll see as you go down through here is the 1888 museum expense. We had included some extra money in there last year for, I think, some structural work that was done. They have decided, and Charlie, I know you're on the Historical Society, and Mr. Harwood asked this question earlier, but they've decided to put a stand-alone porch and ramp in, correct? It's not attached to the building. Is that correct?
It will be, I mean, it will butt up against the building,
Okay.
but how they've decided to attach it or attach it at all, don't know. I'm leaving that up to them.
But we did not include any monies this year.
No, there's no
towards
money.
1888.
They are spending their own funds for that.
That's the most significant change in all of this, is that one area in 1888.
A porch facing the park is being added along with a ramp and ADA in.
Right, it's not ADA accessible now.
Right.
That'll make it ADA
A
accessible.
doorway to enter the back room will be added. The
That,
porch and doorway will be similar to what was there when this building was a hotel cottage.
yep,
Where will the porch be on the east or?
It'll be on
Facing the,
this,
so the,
this side, this side.
To watch pickleball, right?
You have to be inside.
Right.
Where,
So,
On this one is the cemetery maintenance down there at Watauga.
that is coming up. I don't think
Not on this one.
I don't think our cemetery contract is in here. Ms. Norman, are you back with us? The contract with, where's our contract for the cemetery mowing? Is that within Public Works?
yes.
Oh, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, that's in street department.
Okay. No questions. Moving on to page 44, our police department. Chief Miller is with us. Most significant change that you'll see,
Can I back up one second?
yes, absolutely.
Do we maintain any other properties outside the town limits other than the cemetery?
Yeah, I think that median,
Do we, yeah, the median, we mow the median that's at the parkway. The question was asked, department heads, any area outside of town limits that we maintain? Matt, is probably a good question for you. Outside of the cemetery and the median for the parkway, I'm not thinking of any outside of town limits. We have the old landfill that's outside of town limits, but we don't utilize it, monetarily. We don't put any monies into it that I'm aware of. Is anyone aware of anything different? If so, unmute and speak.
What is the cemetery in?
The county. It's not annexed.
It is the county.
It is the county.
It's in the ETJ.
It's in the ETJ
Of the county.
of
No.
the town.
Town.
Yeah, the county doesn't have an ETJ. So the town's ETJ goes out to the entrance,
Road,
Edmiston,
but
that's right.
If you look on the GIS, the cemetery is not in the ETJ. Just FYI.
Okay.
It actually says county. Does Matt know that? You might know that.
About,
Does Matt or Kevin know
Kevin.
that about the ETJ? Does it include the cemetery, or is the cemetery carved out within?
On our map, it shows it not included or just in the county. It does not show it in the ETJ.
Remember we talked about that?
Hang on.
Well, that's why I'm bringing it up.
What'd you say, Kevin? We're talking.
I'm looking, hang on.
Yeah, go on the GIS.
Well, I didn't mean to go down this route.
Oh, no. Yeah, we can.
He's already had that question.
Where are we down the hall?
You want to be here tomorrow, don't you?
I got nothing to do. I just got a job.
Mother-in-law, you'll be here tomorrow. Yeah.
We're patiently waiting.
It's not in the ETJ.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I don't know the history there. I don't know why.
Kevin, does it say that it's in the county?
It's in the
Do we have an agreement with them that?
With the county? I'm not aware of any agreement with the county. It lies, it's, you,
Well, I know it's always been Born Rock Cemetery.
yeah, so I'm not sure that the county's aware of that.
One Rock owned it.
No? Do we own the land? Do we own the land?
We do, we sell it. We sell the plots.
Yeah, we sell the plots.
Better hope you own the land.
We think he's land, we own it.
Let's move on to the police department. Of all of the police department, obviously the most notable change is within our E911 expense line towards the bottom. I'm sorry, page 44. Sorry, Mr. Hunt. Account number 58, E911 expenses has decreased from 180,000 to 65,000. If you look at the top under personnel, you'll see a new line called dispatch salaries of $128,000. That includes what currently is our administrative position that is being, Chief Miller's here, but the administrative position that we have now is being transferred to a dispatch position. We're hiring a new dispatcher. We've made an offer. I don't know if it's been accepted, but we do have a new dispatcher that'll be coming on. So we'll have 2 full-time dispatchers working 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., alternating shifts 7 days a week. So we'll have someone here at the police department 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 a year. So we'll have 2 individuals rotating, providing in-person services and dispatch services. The remainder of that dispatch salary, I believe, is Lieutenant Church, who is going to be overseeing them. There's a portion of, I believe, his salary that's part of that. But if you look at overall personnel cost, you obviously see the 1 additional position there being added in total, and then obviously being offset by the deduction or decrease in what we are paying for our E911 contract. Currently, we're paying Watauga County, or last year, $180,000. We are currently, and that will be a part of this process, looking to partner with Boone for a fee of $65,000 annually. And Chief Miller, I know, is on the line, and he can speak to the details. They've been working quite a bit recently on that transition, but it was brought to, I believe, this council's last spring of 19, to make that decision, and the letter was sent to the county informing them that they had until June the 30th of 2020 notice for the cancellation of that contract. And then during that time, Chief Miller's been working with others and providing that service. And the town of Boone has made a proposal to us for $65,000 to provide the services of dispatch for our police department from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So the nighttime hours. We will cover the daytime hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
When will that go on the line?
Chief Miller, are you on the line or on the call, WebEx?
I am. It'll go into effect probably either the afternoon of June 30th. Is when we'll make the transfer.
And we've got everything we need to set all that up.
So at the bottom, as we move down, there is some capital outlay. It's called capital outlay dispatch. There's $33,000 there. That's broken out between a $25,000 portion and an $8,000 portion. That would get us where we need to be. Is that correct, Chief Miller, within our capital,
Yes.
needs? Those are one-time fees, correct?
Yes.
And so that has been included. I believe Chief Miller presented to the council. I know I've shared communication with you that including the one-time monies that's needed, along with the addition of the 1 position and the cost of Boone's contract, we still fall within or below the cost that we're currently paying to the county.
That's correct.
And in return, we're providing a service here to our citizens 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, that is not currently being provided.
That's wonderful.
Anything you'd like to add, Chief Miller?
Well, I think we've covered it pretty extensively at the retreats and previous council meetings.
Let's be sure to put that in the water bill, that people know that they have that new service
Certainly,
in for July.
certainly.
Good point, Virginia.
Okay,
Can I ask a trivia question of Aaron?
absolutely.
Okay, we're buying this new Ford Explorer. What happens to the one that it's replacing? Do we sell it?
We do surplus, sometimes. Sometimes if we have surplus vehicles, of course, we get rid of them. This year, we're creating additional positions, so we may not have those vehicles to surplus. We're having to make our vehicles last a little bit longer. When we hired the SRO and created that position, of course, we didn't buy an additional vehicle, so we're having to make those vehicles last a little longer. We'll just wait and see about the fourth quarter of the year. If we receive our new vehicle by the fourth quarter and we don't need as many vehicles as we have now, we'll surplus one. But we never know when the vehicles are going to arrive either, so it's hard to decide. We don't want to surplus them too soon.
When did we receive this year's vehicles? March, April?
The second one was finally placed in service right before the COVID pause, so it was early March. It took about 9 months to get the vehicles delivered and get them upfitted and on the road.
Well, who do we deal with? Do we get bids? Do you get bids? How's that working?
We piggyback off of the Sheriff's Association bid, which is actually cheaper than state contract. And there's certain dealers in North Carolina that have the Sheriff's contract. Asheville Ford is who we've been buying from for the last several years through that contract.
Chief Miller, could you talk about your feelings about having a fleet mechanic? Since we've initiated that, how long ago was that, 3 years, 4 years?
What?
The fleet mechanic,
Oh, yeah, the town mechanic, yeah.
town mechanic. What is that? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, having a fleet mechanic with the town, I think, is save the town a great deal of money. Of course, that salary comes out of the street department's budget. But from my standpoint, where it would normally cost me upward toward $1,000 to put brakes all the way around a car and get the oil check, which is 1/10 of my overall maintenance budget, we have somebody at the town shop that can provide those services, and we're extending the life of our vehicles. We were surplusing them about 8 years and about 75 to 80,000 miles. Currently, we're keeping these vehicles on the road upward toward 10 years and putting over 100,000 miles on them. So I don't think that would be possible if we didn't have a good maintenance program.
Thank you.
That's the debt service. Bruce,
That's correct. Yeah, so the debt service, and Ms. Norman can correct me, I believe the debt service that you'll see within each of these departments is more than likely 100% to the installment financing, so vehicles and capital, things of that nature. Is that correct, Ms. Norman?
Correct.
Any other questions? Okay, to move on? Sorry?
I will say one thing, on that debt service. So this debt service that you're looking at proposed for 2021 includes last year's installment purchase. So next year, we should see a downtick in that because we're only purchasing the one vehicle, less equipment this year. So we'll enjoy that next year when that debt service decreases.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, moving on to page 47, the fire department. The only change that I was going to note here, be glad to answer any questions, and I think Mr. Chief Graham's on the line, it looks like. I keep saying on the line, I don't think that's probably the right terminology. On the conference call, WebEx call? Meeting, virtual meeting.
On the fiber.
On the fiber, okay, sorry, Chief Graham, on the fiber. If you look at fire salaries, overtime and part-time salaries last year, $754,000. This year, $754,000. So the salaries did not change. We rearranged some of the part-time and overtime salaries somewhat here. Other than that, there is not any proposed changes, I believe. If any, maybe a microscopic change. I'm trying to look through here. I don't have any notes of any changes within operations, other than an increase in the telephone expense. Any questions for Chief Graham, myself, Ms. Norman on the fire department?
How many, this is kind of both, well, not really fire department, but how many, how many employees have vehicles that they take home
Within the fire department or within the town?
within the town, across the board?
Each department head I know can answer that probably quicker than I can on vehicles, that take-home vehicles. None within admin. Kevin, John's vehicle, I know he takes home periodically, if need be, for meetings, but it stays here the majority of the time.
Right, I was muted. Yeah, just during a period of time, he's doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday. He's been using it. Typically, though, throughout the year, he just leaves it here or leaves it at the office.
Chief Miller, number of police cars?
We probably have about 15 vehicles, but we only have 13 police officers that are full-time. So we have 13 officers that take vehicles home.
Mr. Blackburn?
There's 3 at the shop that take a vehicle home.
Total, including yourself?
Correct.
And then the fire department's a little bit different, where their capital is obviously coming out of the county funding of that. So I'm not,
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Is that where stations 2 and 3 show up?
yes, it is. Yeah, Chief Graham, did you hear the question? Is that where station 2 and 3 show up? Yeah, 2 and 3 is within the county.
Okay.
Correct.
Anything you'd like to add, Chief Graham, while you have you?
In terms of vehicles, we have one take-home vehicle right now that is the deputy chief position, and then I have a vehicle allowance, but it's funded through the fire department board through the county funding and other. It's not a town of Blue Rock thing.
Anything you would like to add towards the budget? I know I briefly touched on it. Very, very little, if any, change.
Yeah, anticipating the sales tax changes, we're pretty much freezing everything capital for sure.
Yeah, not obviously demonstrated here, but I think you all know that a portion of obviously Chief Graham's budget is going to be on decline because of the reduction in sales tax. The fire department, the district receives a fairly large amount of revenue from the county, and so that's obviously projected to be 25 to 30% less this year too. So that's what he's referring to.
There's a figure somewhere, the debt service that the fire department pays toward that building over there, and I've seen it, but I don't see it here. Yearly. Can.
I was unable to hear the question.
There's a portion of the debt service, the amount that is paid towards the building. Do you know what that amount is, or Ms. Norman?
It's a total of 60,000. It's 50 from the Blowing Rock Fire District, and then 10 from the Caldwell County portion of the district.
Yeah, it's a $60,000 a year. On the front end of that resolution is I think where it's documented. It was about 150 or something like that. Ultimately, over 20 years, it's 1.2, 1.3 million.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. If nothing else, moving on to page 50, planning and inspections.
Really only two things here that I've gotten notes on. Be glad to answer any questions, but one being intern part-time salaries is 0. So I know Mr. Rothrock's hoping for some free assistance this summer if it's available. And a decrease in our contracted services by $15,000. The only change there, we had $20,000 in last year for Valley Boulevard. That's now been reduced to $5,000 for implementation assessment. So that number's somewhat of a placeholder, but the reason for the $15,000 decrease from 30 to 15 was the 20 became 5. And I believe that is the only notes I have here. Fairly standard roll from one year to the next. Any questions for Mr. Rothrock or myself or Ms. Norman? Okay.
Shane,
Yes, sir.
I was gonna follow up on a question before the break, was about the short STR helper. I asked Tammy, she said there's not been any violations, found since January 1st.
Okay. Thank you.
Just enlighten me about the homeowners recovery fund.
The Homeowners Recovery Fund?
Yeah, what is,
What page you on?
I'm still on there.
Homeowners Recovery Fund. The question is, what, enlighten Mr. Harwood on what that entails.
Now, that's like $1,000
That's, for every, we collect $10 for every building permit, and 9 of it goes to the state, and the town keeps $1. So we have to budget that amount based on past years of what we had to pay to the state.
Oh, okay.
I think it is, David, if a licensed contractor messes up, he's gonna have the money.
Gotcha.
Okay. Okay, without any further questions, we'll move on to page 52, Public Works Street Division. This is where I believe is this where our cemetery contract falls in, Ms. Norman? Is that correct, or Mr. Blackburn?
15.
Yes, it is.
Cemetery maintenance and repair.
I'm not sure.
Mowing, is that mowing?
The mowing itself, do you know what account number the mowing falls in?
It is under the cemetery maintenance and repair line 015, and Matt, make sure I have this right, but I believe, I remember the reduction is due to your staff going to be mowing this year, is that correct?
I was under the understanding it would still be contracted, but no, if that's something we needed to do, then that wouldn't be a problem.
Why did it
Okay, I
drop?
thought,
That's the reason the 3,000 just seems, because I thought the contract was about 12 or 14,000.
Let us have that conversation. We may need to clarify that internally. We'll be back with you on that one.
Big drop.
Nothing officially has been done. Is that what I'm hearing? We haven't officially stopped the contract or anything at this point?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
You can get a quote from Mathis and Long.
We'll clarify. We'll clarify our position on that one.
Doug hates it, so Doug always tells us how bad it
Doug, you gonna do it for nothing?
is. He's retired, now. He's got plenty of time.
I've got a question on, is $300 enough to cover the physical exams?
Is $300 enough to cover the physical exams?
Where are you?
He's on 052.
I'm not sure what we pay per exam with.
Who's doing that?
the physical exams are typically done with a new hire. So, I mean, we keep an amount in there in case anything happens throughout the year that we don't expect, but we don't typically have that amount, that expenditure unless we have some turnover.
Is that offered to all employees or just street division? or Public Works?
I believe that it is primarily the physical labor positions.
Would that not fall into account with drug testing and so on?
Well, I think the fire, they go through an extensive physical.
Yeah.
EKG,
Right.
Breathing, and drug testing. Is that included drug test?
Matt,
Does a physical exam include a drug test? I don't believe so. I think the drug testing is separate, but we do pre-employment drug testing.
For all employees.
Yes.
Do you do random on the people that are driving the trucks?
Yes, we have
Yes.
the typical CDL random tests that are required. Yeah. Any accident, anything of that nature, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
It's safety sensitive positions.
Okay, thank you.
Be glad to answer any questions. Obviously, Ms. Norman, Mr. Blackburn, the real change here lies towards the bottom. We reduced some of the new monies that were put in last year for road repairs, culvert replacements, ditch line repairs, fire hydrants, valve maintenance, et cetera. We did continue to fund a portion of that. Most of those were reduced by 50%. We did find this year, I think that we had a little bit of extra that we did not spend within each one of those, and so that gave us some comfort in knowing that we could reduce them slightly next year, or a little bit next year going forward.
seems like we had a, winter, not as bad of a winter too. I guess with the supply, you divided the supplies into two things up there for materials and supplies for salt.
That's right. Salt is at 50,000, and Mr. Blackburn, I know, can probably tell us how we are with our salt inventory.
Yeah, we placed an order right towards the end of the winter, so we probably have around 100 tons on hand right now, which will give us an excellent start in the beginning of next winter. So I don't see us having to order salt, unless it's just a terrible winter for quite a while.
Again, the unknown, of course, so we rolled that into this year. Capital outlay is at zero. I know Matt or Mr. Blackburn can definitely speak to the fact that the fleet mechanic you mentioned earlier, Ms. Sweeting, had a lot of conversations with him on the extending of our current fleet and vehicles within Public Works, and I believe he felt confident of getting another year out of the majority of our vehicles that are currently being utilized, and that went into play here with making that decision. Is that correct, Mr. Blackburn?
Yeah, that's right. Steve and I talked about it, and I think, we had a couple things up for replacement, but we feel pretty good that they're going to make it through another year without too many issues.
Any other questions? On page 52.
I don't think comment, off-the-wall comment, the overtime's enough, as many times as we got called out this past.
The comment was, is overtime enough, as many times as you were called out this year?
Yeah, I think we'll get on that. I think some of the guys rather have comp anyway, but I think we'll be all right.
Upgraded sunsets, feel better.
We sure hope. So moving on to page 55, sanitation recycling. You will see absolutely no change here from the prior year. I think there's about a $1100 difference in total here. So,
Matt, do you feel that the fees that we're charging commercial are equitable to what work you're doing in collection?
I believe so. I'm not really familiar what other places are charging, but from the conversations I've had with people looking at going with the town or going with the Republic, I feel like we're pretty close to where we need to be.
Okay.
And the primary reason for no change here is that we're following very close to actuals to budget. So we chose to
That was
roll the
easy.
budget. Yeah, that was easy. Okay. Moving on to page 59, our Park and Recreation Department. Most notable change at the top is obviously a deduction in our seasonal salaries, pool, camp, and part-time mowing. Approximately $34,000 was taken out of those line items. Again, the majority of that is within camps. The pool has been left in with the understanding that we're still moving forward with opening the pool, and so that number was left in. So we reduced seasonal salaries by $21,500. I believe 100% of that is contributed to the camp itself. And then moving down the list, please stop me if you have questions anywhere along the way. Noticeable decrease in material supply park office, 44 last year, 32 this year. Last year that did include, I believe, approximately $14,000 in rewiring electrical work that took place that is no longer obviously needed within the building itself, along with some of the upgrades that took place. My next note is moving down the line towards field trips, adult field trips, and field trips themselves, summer day camp. Reduce those by 50% in hopes that obviously summer camp is back next year. So that was the reason for the 50%. Took 1 year out.
Sorry.
No.
On credit card processing, are we not gonna use credit card, should we ever get open again? I know we had tried it there.
We did not use credit card. I know that we did not adopt any credit card fees last year either, Ms. Norman. So that's been a 2-year. Was that all pool processing? You're muted, sorry.
Sorry, I had another screen up. It is pool and summer camp. It's basically all Parks and Recreation. Anything that they take credit cards for, online. They're, I think, really just using online now versus in-person payments, except at the pool. They do use it at the pool.
How about like American Legion? If they're doing that online, they can do that?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So the reason for the decrease to 0 was because of the use of online. So that fee is no longer applicable. Is that correct? That's why that was taken out last year. It was out in 1920 also. The $1,000.
Well, no, I think that has to do with the transition to, at one time, council wanted to, I think, make a change with the credit card fees, but
Added in, yeah, make them pay for the fee instead of us paying the fee.
Yeah.
right,
Is that what it is?
that has not been done yet as far as making that actually work that way, and we haven't really adopted the fees to charge and so forth.
Well, they're not any fees, so it's zero, so.
Yeah, because that's right, we had
We
talked about
originally
making
said,
it.
yeah, if you do a credit card, it's
Right, pass the cost
whatever
on.
fee. If you do check, it's no fee. You know, let them pay their own fee, and a lot of businesses do that.
So Nicole, did I hear you say you didn't put that in the fee, or you did? If they did credit card?
We did not, I didn't hear at the end of your question.
Are we passing along the fee to the consumer?
We are not passing along the fee, no.
So where would that fee show up on here?
Oh.
Because it's 3%. or 2.7 if you use MasterCard, Visa, or American Express that we're charged.
I know about these fees.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
wonder where we're absorbing that.
it may be another one we come back to if
Yeah, come back on
We
that,
come
just
back to it.
because we thought it was gonna be easier to rent
Sure.
the places online.
Mhm.
And then, contracted services, the Legacy Garden, is Brac paying that, or are we? And one,
What is that?
There's no-
it's the one that you walk from like Chestnut Drive down to, St. Mary's.
I see people out there working, they're not our people.
Yeah, I know that we have obviously that contracted. Is Brac paying the portion for that contract for Legacy Gardens, the cleanup work that's being done
I
there?
think so, but I'm not sure.
I don't believe so.
I
Jennifer?
think they pay.
No, Brac it was done by Enita and Lowell Thomas for many, many years. And when Lowell died, Brac took on paying to have someone do the service. And that's when it was discovered that it was really on private property. And we had to get easements to be able to work on that property. And it was, Brac thought it was better for the town to pay for that service than for them to pay for that service. So we've been paying, the town has been paying for that service for the past at least 3 or 4 years now.
Okay.
No, there's no number there.
There is $8,000. There is under 080. 080. Yeah, 8,000. Looks like it's been the same for 3 years now.
Oh, wait, what?
080, 080.
So 80,
Contracted Services
Oh, okay.
Legacy
I was-
Garden.
I was down at 252 and there's nothing there. I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong line.
Yeah, it looks like at some point we moved that up to contracted services because of the fact, I'm assuming we began the contract with the company that's doing the work.
The stone wall that was going to be built, is that gone away? That's a benign question because I don't really care one way or the other, but I thought we were gonna have another wall out here and it's gone, and is that,
I think that's temporarily on the back burner
okay,
due to funding.
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care.
Isn't that correct, Shane?
Was there money appropriated for it? If so, where did it go? If there was.
I think,
I could begin the conversation that I believe monies were appropriated for Memorial Park renovations with the wall, the trees, the grass may all be a part of whatever number that was. I don't have the number in front of me, but my understanding is that more monies went to different areas to get the park where it is today than what was towards the wall. Maybe a portion of the wall monies was spent in other areas.
I also think what happened too is, if you remember correctly, whoever was working on the wall, I can't remember the person's name, broke his arm or something.
Yeah.
So we had to go further, if I'm not mistaken, and contract it out to complete the wall. Does that sound right, Shane?
This is the wall on the east side.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we had to contract out to complete the wall on this side. Is that right? Is that?
Yeah, Miss Norman, Miss Brown, I know it's definitely before my time, so I believe that's the story that I've definitely been shared, is that's what it took place. More monies was spent to contract it out, and more monies, I think, was
Isn't
spent.
that right? Isn't that the way you remember it, Sue?
Yes, well, it was used for other things besides the second wall. The money.
Right.
And, so Al's right, the stonemason finished the first wall. And he broke his leg, not that it's.
His leg? Okay. One of his.
One of his body.
Yeah, okay, all
One of
right.
his appendages.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the leg, I think.
yeah, okay.
I would also like to say that with the 1888 museum and them making changes, Chris Haight also wanted to see what was going to happen there before we build a wall too
Right.
far, or he we wanted to see what that looked like as well before we continued on with the second wall.
But we would need additional funding to complete that wall, correct? That funding is
Yes.
no longer,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Check.
unlike the revenues, we elected to not decrease, and we can go back and forth here if you have questions, but towards the bottom of the pool, there's 4 line items. We did not decrease those currently, given the fact that there's still some uncertainty of maybe additional costs that could go into opening the pool, sanitation, et cetera. So we elected not to decrease that number like we did the revenue side. We feel pretty confident the revenues will be less because we're simply not able to accommodate as many people. But the expenses very well may be the same. So we did not decrease the expenses within the pool as they were in the prior year. And then no capital, again, is being asked for here, and no monies are being put aside as they have been in prior years to help fund projects within the park. So no capital and no reserve is being accounted for here.
Do we have an estimate on that wall?
Estimate on the wall?
Yeah. What do we take? We have, it's my understanding we have hundreds of stone.
We have, I think we have the material. We have plenty of the material at the water treatment plant, but I don't know if we have a cost.
I can get an estimate, but I don't have a cost on hand right now.
Option material we pay for.
Materials are paid for, so it'll be labor. Again, very little change here within Park and Recreation. Any questions? Page 60 is our Brac Fund. This is just, I think, a little bit more detail than we had earlier with our expenses, with our flowers, landscaping, P.O. box rental, et cetera. But the only change here is exactly $10,000 towards our general fund that will be utilized to help fund some of our expenses within town center. Okay. No questions. Moving on to 61. This is our water and sewer revenue summary. So we did talk about water and sewer revenues earlier. This is just maybe a few more lines. Or actually, I think this may be the exact same schedule as we talked about earlier that breaks out a fairly flat look at revenues for water and sewer, and then a conservative estimate at our impact fees, not knowing development. And again, unlike the last 2 years, this year actually we are not utilizing any fund balance to balance the budget. So it's a balanced budget without utilizing any of our current savings that exist.
That's a good thing.
Okay. We'll start with page 63, Administrative Engineering and Billing. Again, very similar tune here. The only increase that you'll see in personnel is actually the increase in our management allocation from general fund, as our administrative salaries have increased, and we're able to recoup more of that cost from the administrative engineering and billing side of the water and sewer fund. So again, that's a fee that's calculated once a year, or we may do it monthly. Ms. Norman can clarify that, but essentially if you look at it annually, that's a formula that's made up of our administrative time that's spent towards the management of the water and sewer fund. And so that's a formula that's driven based on our personnel cost and benefits, et cetera. Operating maintenance, no change there, and then no capital as we go down the line here this year. Be glad to answer any questions. I know it's a fairly similar look to what we've had in the past.
I think you all have done a really good job, really tweaking the numbers. What happened to, on here, where is the sludge transfer truck? I believe that's going to be over in sludge transfer truck, Ms. Norman, is that in plant ops?
Yes, it's sludge processing, plant
Yes.
operations, account number 034.
Page 66.
Okay.
So, yeah, page 66.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to get ahead of you.
The little sweetheart deal with Boone must have fallen through because I see it going down the mountain a lot.
They gave us a better deal.
Yeah, so Mr. Blackburn can definitely weigh in, but when Lenore, the city of Lenore was our original, has been for I think a number of years, our original point of delivery for our sludge. We worked a contract out with them this past year as we were delivered the sludge truck that was better than expected. And I believe that was done so because of the need for our sludge that was emphasized by the city of Lenore. Apparently, our sludge composite, the composition of our sludge is something that was very desirable by the city of Lenore. And the conversations there with Mr. Hildebrand led to a decrease in what was projected in the per gallon amount. Is that correct, Mr. Blackburn?
Yeah, that's right. What the contract was signed for was definitely less than what the initial thought was going to be when we were going through the process.
But to answer the question about Boone, Boone has, since this began, Boone has also offered for us to deliver our sludge there at a little higher rate than what Lenore offers. So currently, I believe with Lenore, including the mileage, et cetera, it still comes out cheaper than Boone, but Boone is an option that was not there previously. Is that correct, Matt?
That's right. And the city of Lenore right now is going through a process of changing how they process their sludge. I think they're getting a new drier belt press to process the sludge. So as that happens, the availability to take sludge to them may come and go as they work the kinks out of that. So having Boone as an option will definitely be helpful in the event we're forced to haul and Lenore's at a point they can't take anything.
So Boone was not an option previously, correct? And it now is. And the rate that Boone offered was a very good rate, but not as good as what Lenore countered with. So we have both on the table where we previously had one. Fair to say both are better than our previous agreements that we've been operating under, correct?
Absolutely.
So the repayment of the truck capital itself should be sooner than what we expected it to be.
Good.
Because of that. On page 66, any questions? That wanted to point that out, so I'm glad that we did. Other than some slight changes, again, very, very standard roll forwards. Actuals, again, are coming in very close to what we've adopted in the prior year. No capital outlay within our plan ops. Just plan ops, so just talking plan ops at this point at the top of page 66. Lots of roll forwards. Any changes or any questions anyone wants to?
Did we lose somebody salary-wise?
We did not lose anyone
Why is it so
salary-wise.
much lower?
For plan ops, it is not. Maybe in field ops, I think
Field
you're
ops.
referring to field ops. Yeah, well,
I'm sorry, I jumped down there.
that's okay. Yeah, in plan ops, salaries are exactly the same. Yeah, just a little variation there with some cost. But did you have a question, Mr. Matson?
I was just gonna ask her, or I know that we cut back here, are we keeping up enough with repairs and maintenance? Because, we get running into a lot of things down at the water plant that really needs to be done. And sometimes I worry that we're really gonna get in trouble down there.
Yeah,
You mean that we need to provide the money for things to be corrected?
Down at the water plant, some
Yeah.
of the valves, we fixed, and outside, that some of the things we've done, I was just, sometimes I worry that we don't have enough down there or something major does happen.
Didn't we dedicate some funding for that?
in the past years, we've dedicated small amounts, different amounts each year towards repairs as needed. The tank repairs, things of that nature have come out of some of that money. We've most recently filled the cracks. I think we had the infusion that was done that was, some of that money was utilized. We had originally talked in January about putting together a full list of needs at both plants. And I believe Doug Chapman may be on the call, and I know Matt is obviously on the call. That number totaled about 1.2 million in total needs between the two plants. Our plan was to obviously hope to incorporate that into this year's budget along with a repayment plan, a capital improvement plan to repay that. That was going to more than likely have increases in water and sewer rates. And so that need is still there. The needs, I would say, obviously are some are more urgent than others. We put those in a list based on prioritization. And so that is something that we can definitely discuss. It would simply need to come out of fund balance at this point unless we're choosing to raise our rates.
Based on, I think the main thing we'll have to look at, based on what your office is saying there, do they feel comfortable with, I know that we have asked Doug to look into this, and I know it was over $1 million. Do they feel comfortable that we're gonna be able to hopefully limp through for a while?
Matt, Doug, could you hear the question? It was, do we feel good about our current operations capital at the plants going into this year, given the current situation that we're in? Are there any things that you're aware of that's more pressing than others?
No, I think they'll be able to limp through. I think there's obviously issues with the piping downstairs and with the storage tanks that definitely will need to be addressed sooner than later. But as far as this upcoming year, based on this past year, I think we'll be okay.
How good a shape is their water tank now on Green Hill?
Current condition of the Green Hill water tank?
It's good. There were some repairs done to the top vent and to some of the side screening on it, but the tank itself is in good shape. The question has come up about painting of it. That's going to have to happen before too long, but I believe the inspections we've had, everything has come back good.
When do we have to clean it again?
When do we have to clean it again?
I'll have to ask Toby. We talked about it, and I can't remember if it's Clearwell or Green Hill. Should be coming up, I believe, next year for the full clean out where they send the divers in for the inspections and everything. I think that's year after this.
One of the difficult decisions here is with the capital. Obviously, we know we have needs, and at this point, I guess two options. One would be to raise rates and pay for the financing of that, or two would be to utilize fund balance, and that's
It has to be self-sustained.
that's a difficult decision that we're having to make right now. And so, as we talk through department heads, I think we all have the understanding if things are needed, if we need to be more proactive, then we'll bring that to you. This year is going to be different than any other year, more than likely, where in the past we've had budget placeholders in a lot of areas that we've not needed to come to you to prove our need. But I think this year is going to be different. I think as we have things that arise, we're going to have to spend more time coming to the council asking for permission to use fund balance potentially. Or if revenues are coming in better than expected, then that would be a tremendous thing that we're not sure of at this point. So it's going to be much different this year is what we're anticipating with having to ask for more as we need it versus the more proactiveness. Yes, sir.
May not be the time to ask this, but I will anyway. We're out of business with Watauga for emergency water. Right?
Correct.
How are negotiations or your new relationship with Boontown Management proceeding toward using that $4 million loop that has never been used to get us emergency water?
I have an agreement through email with the town manager of Boone that if that need arises, we would pay the current rates that Boone is charging for that water service.
Okay. And we've never, until that happened, Boone never gave us a price.
Correct.
Okay. But they now have,
That is correct.
and we have it available.
That is correct.
Okay. How about the pump? We're gonna sell the pump?
The pump that was at Chatola,
Yeah.
I believe it's been moved down to Public Works. Is that correct, Matt? we just,
That's right. I'm not sure that's been placed on gov deals yet, but the plan is to sell it.
Okay, so it's surplus.
correct.
Okay. I need a pump right now. You never know what the future brings.
So as part of the discussions with Boone,
Wash out your-
we were able to reach an agreement through email.
Good.
with that.
That's fantastic. 'Cause we've been dealing with that for
Ever
8 years.
since the $4 million
Thank
loop
you.
got put in,
Yeah. Appreciate that.
Okay,
10 years ago.
okay, let's move on.
Field operations. Ms. Norman may want to weigh in here. We did have a decrease in salaries. Am I correct in thinking that we transferred a position somewhere? Is that right, Ms. Norman or Mr. Blackburn, helping with answering that question?
Yeah, so when Mark Presnell moved up to the superintendent role, he was in the field operations staff, so that pulled him out of that. My salary and his salary are now out of the street department budget, so that left a vacancy in the field operations that has not been filled yet. But what we plan to.
So no capital within field operations. We did leave $20,000 in our typical water line replacements, repairs, I&I number. And again, if we run into something more significant, that may be, again, having to ask permission to do so. Situation there would be like anything else from an emergency standpoint. We may ask that through communications with the council and then move forward with the amendment if need be. Any other questions? That is our last department. So the remainder of the book that you have in front of you, I don't know if we necessarily need to go page by page through if you have questions, be more than happy to answer those. There are no changes. We did pull back as we've gone through this. We are not putting any money in reserves this year as we've done in the past. So we aren't adding to any reserves. We aren't obviously adding anything to capital outside of what we've talked about with the $102,000 within the police department for the cars and the dispatch. We discussed, I know, debt service somewhat. We have not proposed any changes to any fees of any sort at this time. Our recreation department fees, no changes at this point. Be happy to have any discussion. We simply left everything as is, given the current situation.
Can you go to page 70, please?
70?
And it's 5,530, the salt bin. Didn't we build that?
5,530.
Yeah, it's right at the top.
Salt bin.
I thought.
Yeah, it's the second one
Did
down.
we build the salt bin?
It's been built. It's in
Why
the
is
right.
it-
Yeah, the salt bin was built probably six or 7 years ago, 6 years ago probably.
So that number shouldn't be in there?
Ms. Norming, is this just an accounting thing with how we're doing this?
That is an old project, and I have to look into whether or not it just simply wasn't closed out, or if that was excess funds remaining. I'll have to look at that.
All right.
Okay, find that 80 more and we're good.
I'm working on it. Okay.
That brings up a question on that, is that, didn't we set aside money for the building over there, at the town shop?
The shed.
60,000 was set aside last year, and it is still sitting there. We have not utilized the $60,000 for the lay-down yard shed. That is correct.
The storage building?
The storage
That's
building.
in, that was another question. It's on 94 twice at the bottom.
Page 94.
It's on there twice, and then it's under 20, 20, 21 on 102. So put one finger on 94
Okay, one finger on 94.
And
Okay,
the other one on 102.
102, okay?
You're going where I was at.
Yeah, since you brought it up. So under 10, 20, 45, 4,500, it has a new storage building, 60,000.
Correct.
But if you go back to 94, those bottom things, there's storage building twice.
Yes, I can speak to that. The reason that is there is simply because it's not been updated. There was funding provided in loan proceeds, I think 2 different fiscal years, but we never completed the project, so we just surrendered the loan funds. So that's why you're seeing that there. That does need to be updated.
So let me guess, does that mean the money's somewhere or we gotta come up with it?
No, we surrendered the loan funds back towards the loan. So we in essence never borrowed we borrowed the money, but we basically gave it back in loan proceeds.
Okay.
The first time, not the second time. Or the second time also.
That's correct. The first time, not the second time.
Not the second time. We still have $60,000.
We do?
Yes.
Okay, that was the question, because it's under 2020, 21, that's what.
Is that correct, Ms. Norman? So we surrendered the first time, 60 came in, 60 went out. Now we have the 60 that we just received this past fiscal year still sitting in reserves.
We haven't needed to build this long, we don't need it.
Funds,
Do
yes.
what now?
If we decide to go forward with it this fiscal year, what we would do is allocate those loan funds for it. But yes, we do have loan funds available.
No, we need that building.
Yeah, I agree.
It looks
Why
horrible.
do we need it if we haven't ever built it?
Well, there was,
Appearance is not good over there,
The
Albert.
problem, that was the next
Yeah.
question, is why does it take so long to get built? You know, that's, it's been a long time in the process of asking for that.
so we received designs and plans, I believe, from Green's Construction at the retreat that we had. I believe Mr. Gupton asked if we would wait until he had a chance to work with the Mayview Homeowners Association
That's
to
right.
potentially find other locations, and that's where that stands. So the laydown yard is obviously still in the same situation
Well, and
that
I
it was
thought he
before.
also wanted the placement of the building was gonna go where they wanted, so it was not in their view shed, I think.
That is correct. There was some discussions about the placement of the building, and then that led to discussions about wanting to find an alternative location for the entire laydown yard.
Right.
And that's where we are currently. So
That's when we tried to work with the horse show grounds.
that is correct. I think there was some
Move it
attempts
over
before
there,
me
and-
to make some other areas.
So we just need to
Possibly.
follow up on
We
that.
follow up on that, then, yeah.
The horseshoe grounds didn't work
How
out.
are those?
They didn't, yeah. We were gonna trade, looking at trading with them, but that didn't work. No.
I think most recently, Matt, if I'm correct, there was a piece of property that's close to your area. I won't say exactly where, but I think that was looked at by the homeowner association. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so. It was close to us. I'm not sure where we're at on that right now, if anything ever came back from them or not.
And I believe where it stands right now is we need to have a discussion about what needs to take place there.
All right, well, that caught my attention.
I think we've attempted to be very good community partners with the homeowner association the last year plus. With
Yeah.
that.
And
A particular file somewhere?
I'm sure Tim Gupton's on the line, and I'm sure he will touch base
Absolutely.
with you tomorrow.
That's right. Yeah, Tim and I have discussed it many
Okay.
times.
Good.
Okay.
The point is, if you need the building and we fund the building, and we don't have the building, why do we need the building?
Because it looks bad down there.
Well, that
There's
doesn't answer my question.
still a lot of things that needs to be underneath this shed.
Yeah.
That's not, and I think we've held off on a lot of material that we've not gotten in order to not make that look any worse than what it does over there into the building.
But what goes in the building, where is it now? Out in the weather?
Yeah,
Well, that's not very smart. I thought it's-
that's.
We don't have a building.
That's have a need for something, do it. No. That's my point.
Sir?
Okay, let me think. One thing, as we look at taking over the maintenance for the Valley Boulevard,
Yes.
Can we look at cost comparison between contracting that out and getting equipment and personnel to do that? Because
Yes.
okay.
Wasn't
Yeah, so we-
Piedmont
we-
interested in quoting
We're
on
in
that?
discussions now with Piedmont of giving us a quote of what they would charge, starting with them, obviously, they're the ones that are most familiar with it. So we've asked them formally to give us a quote of what they would charge going forward. We take that over in July of 2021, so that would be in the following
Yeah.
year's budget. So
They've
that,
actually been doing a really good job the last couple of days.
Yeah,
They-
yeah, they have.
Well, they're good.
and I can speak to the reasoning why the quality, I think, has increased somewhat, is they've had changes within Piedmont themselves. I know Jennifer's on the line. I spoke to Chris Pate several weeks ago about some frustration about some of the quality that was going on there. One, we're grateful that they're continuing to mow. I know they have a contract. Other areas within DOT's services aren't getting mowed right now. So we're very grateful that Piedmont's still mowing and upholding their contract. But they've had some changes, I think, within some of their quality control.
Replace some trees also.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
they sure have.
So they've had some change, and they've spoken to Mr. Pate about the changes they've had. They've apologized for some of the quality and et cetera that's been going on.
And what is right-of-way clearing?
Right-of-way clearing,
Yeah.
is that within the streets department?
It was in that first 27 pages of but it said, contracted right-of-way clearing. Matt, is that the area under the parkway? No.
I'm not real sure.
Okay.
Ask,
I'll have to
ask,
find it.
ask Nicole.
Huh?
Ask Nicole.
No, he's right there.
My understanding of the clearing would be cutting back limbs, et cetera, within our areas.
So we're contracting that.
Yeah, I understood, Matt, that it was like the areas, we used to have the Grim Reaper tool. They called it the Grim Reaper that you could hit right of ways with. And now we contract that out because we don't have that tool anymore. It kind of was a dangerous thing. Is that right, Matt?
No, we hadn't really contracted any right-of-way clearing out.
We need to, I have a new driver, we were on the day people, he almost killed people.
Don't you have the tools to do right-of-way clearing yourself?
Yeah, we have a bucket truck and pole saws. I mean, we're able to do, what needs to be done between that and the sewer line right-of-way clearing. None of that has ever been contracted as far as I know.
Okay, I'm gonna check the account
Yeah.
detail.
On page 21, under transportation, we say continued funding from contracted right-of-way clearing. That's within our transportation streets department. So it would be within, but I'm assuming within contracted services if we are doing that.
Could that be
Would that be
leaves
the
and
leaf
brush
removal
pickup
or
that we
leaf pickup
contract
that we
out?
contract out?
I know leaf removal, et cetera, is within contracted services, right? Ms. Norman, is that correct? But I don't know if we don't have a separate line item for right-of-way of any sorts, clearing.
We need it.
Yes, the leaf removal is within contracted services, and my understanding was we always had a portion of the contracted services for when we needed to contract out right-of-way clearing.
Yeah, 15,000 for tree removal, so maybe that's one and the same. Maybe the tree removal and the contract, the clearing is maybe.
Yeah, just check that, it just popped up at me.
Okay. Will do.
If y'all need a place for it, I can show you.
A what?
Need to know where to use that money.
Oh, thanks.
And it was talked about last year. Matt, can you give us an update on the old landfill, the decision that's been made there with composting? I know we've gone through and gotten some cost estimates and et cetera within that area.
Yeah, I think we're to the point right now, the property needs to be surveyed and potentially subdivided into 2 lots. Once we need to prove to the state that the area we want to do the composting has no garbage in it and was never part of the original landfill, which we feel certain it was not. But we need to get out there and dig some test pits in some areas and have that proved. And then once that's done, we can have it surveyed, the boundaries of what we want to consider a compost facility. And once that's done, the permitting process should be pretty straightforward.
Okay, great. That's for you, Virginia.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Got that. Got that.
Overall, Mr. Fox, how do you think that our grants have gone lately? Are we doing, do you think they're going to be able to apply for as many, especially working through COG and Bill and some of them that trying to do what we can?
I think part of the plan that was coming up with some of our water and sewer needs was going to involve asking for the COG and others to assist us in maybe some grants, with some of the water lines, and especially the plant upgrades. And I had talked with Mr. Phil True, about some of the things that were out there. So that was going to be something that was coming up that's obviously not currently in the works. But, you know, I don't know if we've done, I don't know in the past, I think we could do more with looking at grant opportunities.
Well, I didn't mean to phrase it quite that way, that probably, that's what I was asking, do you think there is more that we can do with grants and working in conjunction with COG and others?
I think the opportunity is definitely there. I think with most of the grants, and I know Ms. Norman can weigh in, most of them are around projects and capital, obviously, so that's not something that we have really in this year's budget, but it is something as we move forward we need to be looking at first before we look at just typical financing those projects. And Mr. Chapman, I don't think is on the line, or if he is, he's having trouble. But we had talked about that previously with some of the capital needs within the water and sewer that was coming up, that we were talking about some of the opportunities that were out there, maybe within some of the grants that exist, and clean water trust funds, and et cetera, and utilizing the COG and others for help with that.
I'm still on, Shane.
Okay. Question was talking about grants, et cetera. I know we had conversations at the retreat and after the retreat with some of our water and sewer needs that were coming up, and potentially trying to leverage Clean Water Trust and maybe any grant funding that was out there. Obviously, we've put that on hold for now, but anything you would like to add for grants or anything that's out there right now that could be utilized?
Well, many that are offered by the state or by state agencies are related to either income or to what your water rates are or sewer rates, and the town's rates are pretty low compared to the median household income. And there's not a lot of low to moderate income in Blowing Rock, so those grant monies are hard to come by. There are some that are related to USDA has some monies, but they're kind of in the same boat. So it would be hard for the town to get some of those grant monies. Possibility of something like ARC, the Appalachian Regional Commission. Oftentimes those are related to economic development type activities. I believe the town received some ARC money from the Boone Interconnect. I know you guys were talking about it earlier.
That's right.
So there may be something like that. And the town has gotten Clean Water Management Trust Fund money before, but those are probably pretty slim projects, pretty slim monies out right now because that fund doesn't have as much money.
Yeah, Mr. True and I had conversations this past fall and winter about trying to utilize ARC going forward. That's not something that we've been very successful in the past, but there's been some change in leadership and change in how those grants are looked at from a qualification standpoint in the last year. There's been some change there. So a COG has a lot more of a say-so or more of an input on some of the grant funding that's out there, especially with ARC. They're utilizing them to be a filtering agent. And so those conversations are definitely out there, and we'll continue to have them as we look towards the projects and things of that nature going forward.
think you all have done a great job with what we have to deal with.
Yeah, good job.
Really do.
Well, really, it couldn't be said more of a team effort. Like I said, the things that were originally in the first draft obviously are not in this draft, with the department heads taking back the workbooks that they had worked so hard on and making changes that were needed. So it's definitely been a great team effort by everyone, understanding the situation we're in. I think everyone understands and is grateful just to be continuing to work and given the opportunity to be here and doing the job that they're assigned to. And so everyone seems to be in that same boat, very appreciative of what's going on. But again,
You've got a list of what we need to follow up on?
correct,
Yeah.
we do.
Albert, you had a comment?
I just say that as a history major, the Depression in America, which my father always talked about, so it must have been horrible, lasted from the 30s until, if you're honest with yourself, we didn't get out of it until World War II. This one hit us in 2 months, and we're just about in the same shape that took that long to do before. The manager and the staff have done something short of miraculous to not let it hurt the base of this town any more than it has. And I give him 3 cheers.
Agree.
Again, full staff on this one. This is as much of a team effort as there ever has been with the budget, I'm sure, of coming together and everyone understanding that cuts need to be made and a lot of uncertainty exists out there. So we're all, I think I can speak for Ms. Norman and all of us, I think we're all, everyone hoping that things financially and obviously from a COVID standpoint, from a public safety standpoint, turns around quicker than what we're potentially anticipating here. I think we've got a pretty conservative budget, 30%, sales tax, 40% TDA, et cetera. That's before you. I hope we're able to give a first quarter and a second quarter update that shows a much different scenario. And that was our goal here, is to maybe play it safe. We hope we're playing it safe, and we hope we can have conversations as we get into the mid-year, if not sooner, that allows us to look at things a little differently than what they are right now. So,
Now, we normally have another retreat mid-year. Are you strong enough?
am I strong enough? Now, we have one on the books, I believe, for the
June.
last week of June.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the question could be asked, do you want to continue or do you want to push it later in the year? It's the update that I can provide is fairly short, I would say, given our current projects that we have out there.
I think, with the lack of funding and the lack of being able to move forward because of the unfortunate situation that's going on, what are we going to achieve with a retreat?
I'd rather see like July, August, and September quarter.
Yeah.
In the end, see some figures on how we're doing before we even
Yeah,
try and sit down on a retreat.
yeah,
About
it's
1 October.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the
to
fall.
lead into our January retreat.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You may just need updates
Yeah.
on how we're
Yeah.
doing. And
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons we like the middle of the year is so we didn't lose sight of what our goals were in January. And I think you've done a good job still outlining that. So, a lot of them are fiscally impossible right now. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we'll have, good or bad, we'll have better knowledge as we get into the fall of how the summer is played out. And obviously the summer and the fall are so very important to Blowing Rock. And so we'll have better knowledge as we get into the year end and then as we go into the first quarter. So that can be scheduled as quickly as we need it to be. So.
Well, and I think when the students come back, there's going to be an impact or not an impact of COVID. So that's going to also, I think, we may see something there. So.
I'd
Well-
like to say one thing. I echo what Albert said about the staff and Shane just being short and miraculous.
It is.
Really good job.
It is. Some other towns are hurting on us.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say is, and Charlie and I were talking about this, is as the new guy here, I want to thank you guys for the leadership you've shown over the past years in getting our fund balance to where it is so that we can absorb this shock. I had a conversation with J.D. Lawrence that, it's my understanding, in the 80s, our fund balance was like 5%.
It was.
You know, and, so I appreciate what you've done. I appreciate what past councils and past mayors have done to get us to where we are, that we have the cushion and to absorb this blow.
To that, I would add, and Doug knows, our former manager, Scott Hildebrand, was zealous about building up our fund balance. That's where it started.
Well, and it's snowballed from there in a very favorable manner. So,
Well, like you said, look at it across the state now, and how many towns that didn't have, had never put in much fund balance at the shape they're in now, and they're the ones that's really asking the state for money right now to get them kick-started, to help pay for the losses that they've absorbed through sales tax, occupancy taxes, and pricing the fees, you know.
Well, and I'll throw in, thank you for that. But I think we also looked at the problems that were in this town, because as a result of not changing that tax rate, there was a large problem with maintenance. And that's where the bond came from and
Like deferred stuff.
oh yeah, the citizens came forward. They were tired of the sewer not working and the water not working and, and the streets. So, kudos to our citizens that stepped up and helped us because, we didn't have to do it, so, without their support.
all that being said,
And I would
Thank you.
add that we
All
have,
that being said, thank you guys.
Thank you.
thank you, citizens of Blowing Rock,
Yeah.
and department heads,
Thank
Mr.
you all.
Fox, and the council.
thank you, Nicole, for all the
yeah.
work that's
Very
been put
good.
into this. We had a long-standing early morning appointment time that we would go through the budget before kids and other things would take place. So it's worked out. It's worked out well. This budget's been drafted at probably more off hours than on hours in different ways. So it's been a good effort. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
This year.
What's that?
You've had to do 2 or 3 budgets.
In several budgets, yeah, drafted.
Well, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Budget meeting adjourned.
Thank y'all.